Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty cool story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. So get cozy, enjoy it, and watch it till the end, guys.
In the grim darkness of the far future, there are warriors who stand as humanity's ultimate bulwark against extinction. You've heard of the Space Marines, the transhuman giants who stride across battlefields like demigods, crushing the Emperor's enemies beneath their ceramite boots. Each one is worth 100 ordinary men. Each one is a legend forged in gene science and tempered in war. But there exists another breed of warrior, rarer still, deadlier still, more perfect in every conceivable way. These are the Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's own guardians, and the gulf between them, and even the mighty Space Marines, is vast enough to swallow armies whole. Imagine, if you will, a golden figure standing alone on a battlefield. Around him, arrayed in all their terrible glory, stand 100 Space Marines, not initiates, not scouts. 100 fully trained, fully equipped Adeptus Astartes, each carrying centuries of Imperial genetic engineering in their veins, each armed with weapons that could level buildings, each clad in armor that has turned aside alien claws and heretic blades on 1,000 worlds. This is not a hypothetical born of idle speculation. This is the mathematics of war in the 41st millennium, a cold calculation written in the blood of countless battles. 1 Custodian, 100 Space Marines, and the odds, terrifyingly, are considered roughly even. How can this be? How can a single warrior, no matter how skilled, no matter how enhanced, stand equal to a force that could conquer worlds? The answer lies in the very nature of what the Custodes are, in the secrets of their creation, in the purpose for which they were designed. The Adeptus Astartes were built to be the Emperor's soldiers, a mass-produced army of transhuman warriors capable of waging war across the galaxy. The Custodes were built to be his companions, his protectors, his living weapons. Every Space Marine chapter traces its lineage back to one of the Primarchs, those demigod sons of the Emperor scattered across the stars. Every Custodian traces his creation back to the Emperor himself, crafted by the master of mankind's own hands, imbued with a spark of his power that burns in their blood like a caged star. This is not merely a matter of incremental improvement. This is not the difference between a bolt pistol and a plasma gun, between carapace armor and power armor. This is the difference between a production line tank and a handcrafted work of art that happens to be able to wage war. This is the difference between a soldier and a hero from myth. The Space Marines are humanity's greatest warriors. The Custodes are something else entirely, something that transcends the category of warrior altogether and enters the realm of legend. They are to the Astartes what the Primarchs are to their father, and it is no accident that even amongst the Emperor's gene sons, there were those who looked upon Constantin Valdor, the first Captain General of the Custodes, and whispered that he was a Primarch in all but name. Throughout this journey into the heart of the Imperium's most elite forces, we will peel back the layers of myth and examine the cold, hard reality of what makes the Custodes so utterly superior. We will walk the blood-soaked halls of the war within the webway, where 10,000 golden warriors held back the endless tides of chaos for years without respite. We will examine the genetic alchemy that transforms infants into living weapons over decades of painstaking work. We will analyze the equipment forged from auramite, that impossibly rare golden metal that makes ceramite seem like paper. We will study the tactics of warriors who fight not as squads, not as companies, but as individual champions, each one a master of every weapon, every strategy, every path to victory. The question is not whether one Custodian could defeat 100 Space Marines. History has already answered that question in battles too numerous to count, in conflicts spanning 10,000 years of Imperial history. The real question is why. What makes them so much more than the already superhuman Astartes? What secrets of genetic engineering and psycho-conditioning elevate them so far above warriors who are themselves the terror of the galaxy? The answers we will uncover are as brutal as they are fascinating. They speak to the Emperor's vision for humanity, to the price of perfection, to the difference between a weapon designed for conquest and a weapon designed for something far more focused and far more terrible. The Adeptus Astartes were meant to forge an Imperium. The Adeptus Custodes were meant to ensure that no power in the galaxy, terrestrial or otherwise, could harm the one who created it. One is an army, the other is an absolute defense made manifest, a walking embodiment of the principle that some things are worth protecting at any cost. So join me as we delve into the golden archives of terror, as we examine the differences that make all the difference, as we understand why the Emperor himself once said that he would rather see 1,000 space marines die than lose a single custodian. This is not hyperbole. This is not propaganda. This is the mathematics of supremacy, written in the gene code of the Imperium's finest, proven on battlefields where reality itself frays at the edges, and only the strongest, the fastest, the most perfect can survive. When we speak of the Custodes, we speak of perfection, not the crude, rushed perfection of the Astartes, impressive as they are, not the flawed brilliance of the Primarchs, magnificent as they were. We speak of something closer to the Emperor's own design, warriors who embody his will as surely as his own golden blade, who carry a fragment of his purpose in every cell of their reconstructed bodies. To understand why one of them is worth 100 space marines is to understand the very nature of the Imperium itself, the compromises it had to make, and the price it was willing to pay for absolute security at its heart. Origins of creation, mass production versus masterpiece. The story of what makes a custodian so vastly superior to a space marine begins not on the battlefield, but in the gene forges and biolaboratories deep beneath Terra, in an age before the Imperium even existed. To understand the gulf between these two breeds of transhuman warrior, you must first understand the fundamental difference in their creation. The Adeptus Astartes are manufactured. The Adeptus Custodes are crafted. The distinction is everything. Consider the process by which a space marine is made. An aspirant, typically a youth in his early adolescence, is selected from the recruiting worlds of his chapter. Perhaps he comes from a death world where only the strongest survive childhood. Perhaps he is a hive ganger who has proven his worth in the Undercity Wars. Perhaps he is the son of a tribal chief on a feral world, raised from birth to be a warrior. Whatever his origin, he brings with him the basic genetic material, the raw clay from which a space marine will be sculpted. What follows is a brutal but ultimately standardized process, refined over 10 millennia into a reliable production method. The aspirant undergoes surgery. 19 separate organs, the gene seed derived from his chapter's Primarch, are implanted into his body over the course of years. The first is the secondary heart, giving the space marine 2 beating hearts to pump blood through his enhanced form. Then comes the os modular, which reinforces his skeleton and makes his bones virtually unbreakable. The Biscopia rapidly develops his muscular system, granting him the strength to crush stone with his bare hands. On and on the implantation goes, each organ changing him, enhancing him, pushing his human form into the realm of the transhuman. His body grows, swelling to nearly 8 feet in height, packed with muscle denser than any natural human could possess. His reflexes become superhuman. His body can filter toxins, survive in hard vacuum for a limited time, and metabolize information from consuming an enemy's flesh. He becomes, in effect, a living weapon system. But here is the crucial point. This process is, at its core, mass production. The gene seed is replicated from a master template derived from the Primarchs. The surgical procedures follow established protocols developed over thousands of years. The training is rigorous, but follows a curriculum refined across generations. A chapter can create dozens of new space marines in a relatively short period. Given enough aspirants and gene seed, they can maintain their numbers even in the face of heavy casualties. The Adeptus Astartes were designed from the beginning to be an army, and armies require numbers. They require the ability to replace losses, to scale up production when needed, to create warriors quickly enough to fight the Imperium's endless wars. This is both their great strength and their fundamental limitation. The process can be taught to others. The apothecaries of each chapter can perform the implantation procedures. The gene seed can be harvested from fallen brothers and used to create new warriors. The system is robust, reliable, and proven, but it is also, necessarily, a compromise. The Emperor and his genetic architects could have made the Astartes more powerful, faster, tougher, smarter, but each enhancement would have made the process more complex, more prone to failure, more difficult to mass produce. The Space Marines represent the best balance between capability and producibility that the Imperium could achieve. Now consider the creation of a Custodian, and understand that almost nothing I just described applies. There is no gene seed. There are no implanted organs following a standard template. There is no production line, no established protocol that can be handed down to a corps of surgeons and technicians. Each Custodian is unique, a singular work of genetic engineering that has more in common with the creation of the Primarchs themselves than with the manufacturing of Space Marines. The process begins not in adolescence, but in infancy. The candidates are selected from the noble houses of Terra, infants barely old enough to survive outside the womb. These children, drawn from bloodlines that have been serving the throne since before the Age of Strife, are brought to the secret biolaboratories deep beneath the Imperial Palace. What happens to them there is known only to the Emperor's most trusted bioalchemists, the descendants of the genetic cults who aided the Master of Mankind in creating the Primarchs themselves. These are secrets that the Mechanicus of Mars would commit any atrocity to possess, knowledge that the Adeptus Astartes have never been privy to, techniques that date back to the Dark Age of technology and beyond. The transformation is not a matter of surgery. It is not a process of implanting organs grown from gene seed. It is instead a complete genetic restructuring at the cellular level. Bioalchemical processes, triggered by substances whose formulas are guarded by the Custodes themselves, rewrite the infant's genetic code from the inside out. Every cell in his body is altered, transformed, perfected. His bones are rebuilt molecule by molecule using materials that make the reinforced skeleton of a Space Marine seem fragile. His muscles are restructured with fibers that contract and expand with a speed and force that defies natural law. His nervous system is rewired to process information and react to stimuli faster than the human brain should be capable of comprehending. This is not enhancement. This is recreation. When the process is complete, decades later, what emerges is no longer remotely human. The original genetic material provided the template, the starting point, but everything that follows is the work of the Emperor's designs. A Space Marine is a human who has been augmented with transhuman organs. A Custodian is a being whose every cell has been touched by the Emperor's own genetic genius, whose body has been rebuilt from the ground up to embody perfection. The distinction is fundamental. The Space Marine's human genes are still there, augmented and enhanced, but present. The Custodian's genes have been rewritten entirely, transformed into something that has never existed in nature and cannot exist without the specific alchemy used in their creation. The time investment alone speaks volumes. A Space Marine can be ready for battle within a decade of beginning the transformation. Rushed programs during times of war have produced combat-ready Astartes in even less time, though such haste often leads to genetic instability. A Custodian requires decades of continuous bioalchemical treatment, constant monitoring, endless adjustments to the genetic formula to account for the unique characteristics of each candidate. The Emperor himself is said to have personally overseen the creation of the first 10,000 Custodians, individually reviewing each candidate, adjusting each formula, ensuring that every warrior who would stand at his side was as close to perfect as genetic science could achieve. Even today, 10,000 years after the Emperor's internment upon the Golden Throne, the creation of new Custodians continues, but at a pace that would be glacial to anyone familiar with Space Marine recruitment. Where a chapter might create 100 new brothers in a century, the Custodians might create 10. Where the Astartes can accelerate production in times of need, the Custodians cannot rush the process without risking failure and the loss of an irreplaceable candidate. It is said that it took the Emperor 200 years to create the original 10,000 Custodians. In the 9,000 years since his internment, the bioalchemists of Terra have created perhaps 9,000 more. The numbers speak for themselves. This is not a process that can be scaled. This is artistry, not manufacturing. And with that individual attention, with that painstaking care, comes results that the mass-produced Space Marines simply cannot match. A Custodian is larger than a Space Marine, standing 9 feet tall or more in his armor. His reflexes are faster, his strength is greater, his mind is sharper, capable of tactical calculations that would take even a veteran Astartes captain precious seconds longer to process. His body is more resilient, capable of surviving wounds that would kill a Space Marine instantly. He does not merely survive in hard vacuum, he can fight in it effectively for extended periods. He does not merely filter toxins, his body can neutralize almost any biological or chemical weapon on contact. He does not merely have enhanced senses, he can perceive threats on an almost precognitive level, reading the flow of battle like a language written in blood and fire. The purpose behind these differences is equally telling. The Space Marines were designed to be the Emperor's army, to conquer the galaxy in his name, to bring the scattered worlds of humanity back into the fold through war and diplomacy. They needed to be numerous enough to wage campaigns across thousands of worlds simultaneously. They needed to be good enough to win those wars against aliens who had conquered the stars while humanity cowered in the dark. But they did not need to be perfect. Good enough was good enough when you could field 1 million of them. The Custodians were designed for a single, focused purpose: to keep the Emperor alive. Every enhancement, every genetic modification, every nanosecond of faster reaction time, every millimeter of additional reach, every incremental increase in combat effectiveness was justified by that singular mission. They did not need to be numerous. They needed to be unstoppable. They did not need to conquer worlds. They needed to ensure that no force in the galaxy, no matter how powerful, could reach the master of mankind. They were not an army. They were an absolute defense personified, each one a warrior of such capability that he could stand alone against threats that would require entire companies of Space Marines to overcome. This difference in purpose manifests in every aspect of their being. A Space Marine is trained to fight as part of a squad, a company, a chapter. His tactics are built around combined arms, supporting fire, coordinated assaults. He is most effective when working with his brothers, when his strengths complement theirs and their strengths shore up his weaknesses. A Custodian is trained to be a complete warrior in himself. He masters every weapon, every tactic, every form of combat. He can fight alone, surrounded by enemies, and not merely survive, but triumph. Where a Space Marine thinks in terms of squad tactics and company-level strategies, a Custodian thinks in terms of personal mastery and individual excellence. The genetic architects who created the Space Marines knew what they were doing. They were creating soldiers, and soldiers are meant to operate en masse. The Emperor, who created the Custodians, was building something else entirely. He was creating champions, warriors of such individual excellence that each one could hold a critical position alone if necessary. Guardians who could stand watch over the most important being in the galaxy without ever needing reinforcement. The Adeptus Astartes are humanity's sword, designed to strike out into the galaxy and conquer. The Adeptus Custodes are humanity's shield, designed to stand unmovable at the center and ensure that the heart of the Imperium never stops beating. When you understand this fundamental difference in purpose and creation, the gap in capability begins to make sense. It is not that the Space Marines are weak or poorly designed. They are, in their own right, one of the greatest military forces ever conceived by the human mind. But they were designed for breadth, for versatility, for numbers. The Custodes were designed for depth, for perfection, for absolute supremacy in their specific role. A factory can produce thousands of excellent rifles. A master craftsman can produce a single perfect sword. Both have their place in war. But when you need the absolute best, when failure is not an option, when the stakes are literally the survival of all humanity, you don't reach for the factory rifle. You reach for the master's sword. You reach for the Custodes. Physical supremacy, beyond human, beyond Astartes. Standing beside a baseline human, a space marine is a god-made flesh. Nearly 8 feet of transhuman might, capable of crushing a man's skull with his bare hands, of running at speeds that blur the human eye, of surviving injuries that would kill a normal person 10 times over. His bones are fused with ceramite and adamantium. His blood carries hypercoagulants that seal wounds in seconds. His muscles can exert force measured in tons. He is everything the human form could become if genetic science and surgical enhancement were pushed to their logical extremes. And yet, when a Custodian enters the room, even the Space Marine feels small. The physical differences begin with size. Where a Space Marine in his armor stands perhaps 8 feet tall, a Custodian towers at 9 feet or more. This is not merely a matter of height. Every proportion is larger, more perfect, more imposing. The shoulders are broader, the limbs longer, the frame massive with muscle that makes even the enhanced physique of an Astartes look almost human by comparison. When Constantin Valdor walked into a room containing Space Marines, even veterans of centuries of warfare, it is recorded that they instinctively stepped back. The sheer physical presence of a Custodian is overwhelming. A reminder, written in flesh and bone, that these are beings designed to walk alongside the Emperor himself, to stand guard over the most powerful psyker in the galaxy without appearing diminished in comparison. But size is merely the most obvious difference. The real gulf in capability lies in the details, in the thousands of small enhancements that combine to create something far greater than the sum of its parts. Consider reaction speed. A Space Marine's nervous system has been enhanced to process information and command his limbs faster than any baseline human could match. His reaction time is measured in milliseconds, fast enough that he can track a speeding vehicle and shoot out its tires before a normal person would even register its presence. A Custodian's reaction time is measured in fractions of milliseconds. In combat, this means he is already moving before his opponent has finished his strike. He sees the attack coming, not because his eyes are faster, though they are, but because his brain is processing every micro-expression, every shift in weight, every telegraphing motion that precedes violence, and his body is responding before the threat fully materializes. This enters the realm of the almost precognitive. Custodians are described in the lore as possessing the ability to read the numerology of the near future, to perceive the flow of battle moments before it occurs. This is not warp sorcery or psychic power. This is the result of a mind and body working in such perfect harmony, processing information so quickly and completely that the Custodian effectively sees a few seconds into the future through pure cognitive excellence. A Space Marine reacts to threats. A Custodian anticipates them. He is already dodging before the bolt round leaves the barrel, already striking before his enemy's guard drops, already 3 moves ahead in a dance of death that his opponents cannot follow. Physical strength is another area where the gap becomes apparent. A Space Marine can bend steel bars, can tear open bulkhead doors with his bare hands, can kill an armored opponent with a single punch. Tests conducted by the Mechanicus have recorded Space Marines exerting over 2 tons of force with their primary arm. A Custodian's strength is in another category entirely. They can wield weapons that would require a Space Marine to use both hands, wielding them one-handed with perfect control. They can punch through ceramite armor, something even a Space Marine struggles to do without a power fist. In the war within the webway, There are accounts of custodians tearing apart Chaos Space Marines, who are themselves enhanced beyond even loyalist Astartes, like a man might dismember a puppet. The musculature that enables this strength is fundamentally different from that of a Space Marine. Where Astartes' muscle fiber is dense and powerful, Custodian muscle operates on principles that border on the impossible. The fibers contract faster, generate more force per unit of mass, and recover from exertion almost instantly.
Okay, I need to break from the script for a second because this stuff genuinely fascinates me. When I started this channel, I was a Space Marine fanboy through and through. Blood Angels were my army, still are. I loved the idea of these enhanced warriors standing against impossible odds. Then someone in the comments a while back asked me to cover the Custodes, and I thought, sure, they're basically fancy Space Marines, right? How different can they be? Oh man, was I wrong. The research for this video completely changed how I see the 40k universe's power scaling. The Custodes aren't just better than Space Marines, they're playing a completely different game. It's like comparing a professional athlete to a genetically engineered superhuman. Both are impressive, but one operates on principles the other can't even comprehend. And the craziest part, Warhammer consistently shows this in the lore, it's not just hype. Every time the Custodes show up in the books, they validate these insane ratios. Anyway, back to the story.
A Space Marine can maintain peak combat effectiveness for hours before fatigue becomes a factor. A Custodian can fight for days. During the Webway War, Custodians fought continuously for weeks at a time, with only brief moments of rest, when the demonic hordes momentarily withdrew to regroup. By the end, Space Marines would have been dead from exhaustion. The Custodians fought on. Durability is yet another area where the differences compound. A Space Marine's Larraman's organ releases cells that seal wounds within seconds, preventing him from bleeding out. His os modular reinforced skeleton can withstand impacts that would shatter normal human bones. His redundant organs mean that he can survive injuries that would kill a normal human instantly. But he can still be killed. A Lascannon hit will end him. Sufficient bolter fire will bring him down. A chainsaw to the neck will decapitate him as surely as it would any mortal. A Custodian is, for all practical purposes, nearly invulnerable by conventional standards. There are accounts in the lore of Custodians continuing to fight with horrific injuries that would have killed a Space Marine outright. One continued fighting with half his face missing, his skull exposed to the air, the brain tissue visible through the shattered bone. Another fought on after a chain fist opened his torso, his internal organs visible through the massive wound. These are not isolated incidents. They are examples of the baseline resilience that every Custodian possesses. Their bodies do not merely heal fast, they refuse to acknowledge injuries that would be fatal to lesser beings. This resilience extends beyond physical trauma. The bioalchemy that creates a Custodian renders him nearly immune to disease, poison, and toxins of all kinds. Where a Space Marine has organs that filter out most toxins, a Custodian's entire cellular structure rejects foreign contaminants. There is no poison fast-acting enough to affect him before his body neutralizes it. There is no virus engineered by the Imperium's enemies that can gain purchase in his blood. Even the warp-spawned plagues of Nurgle, which can corrode ceramite and turn Space Marines into bloated horrors, slide off a Custodian's enhanced biology like water off auramite. The sensory capabilities of a Custodian are similarly enhanced beyond what the Astartes possess. A Space Marine has acute vision, able to see in the dark and pick out details at extreme range. A Custodian can perceive individual photons, can see across spectrums of light invisible to human eyes, can track the heat signatures of targets through walls. His hearing can detect heartbeats from across a room, can filter out background noise to focus on a single conversation in the middle of a war zone. His sense of smell can identify specific chemicals, can track an enemy by scent days after they have passed through an area. Every sense is not merely enhanced, but perfected, operating at levels that approach the theoretical maximum of what biological systems can achieve. But perhaps the most telling difference lies in the mind. A Space Marine is conditioned through hypno-indoctrination, his brain altered to remove fear and doubt. to instill absolute loyalty and an unwavering commitment to duty. He is smart, capable of tactical analysis and strategic thinking, but he is still, fundamentally, thinking at human speeds, processing information through a brain that, while enhanced, is still recognizably human in its basic architecture. A custodian's mind has been rebuilt from the neural pathways up. His brain processes information faster, stores memories more perfectly, analyzes tactical situations with a clarity that borders on computational. When Konstantin Valdor spoke, even the Primarchs paid attention, because his mind was operating on a level that few beings in the galaxy could match. He could see patterns in chaos, could analyze the flow of battle across multiple fronts simultaneously, could coordinate defensive strategies that would take even a Space Marine captain precious seconds longer to formulate. This mental superiority manifests in ways both obvious and subtle. In combat, a custodian is processing every variable in real time. The position of every enemy, every ally, the terrain, the weather, the angle of incoming fire, the structural integrity of nearby buildings, the probable locations of reinforcements. All of this information is analyzed, weighted, incorporated into his tactical calculations without conscious thought. His mind is a weapon as surely as his spear, and it gives him advantages that go beyond mere physical superiority. Intelligence gathering and analysis are areas where custodians excel beyond any Space Marine. Each custodian is trained not just in combat, but in diplomacy, in investigation, in the subtle arts of intelligence work that would make an inquisitor jealous. They can read body language with perfect accuracy, can detect lies through micro-expressions invisible to normal observation. They speak dozens of languages fluently. They understand political maneuvering, economic systems, social structures. A Space Marine is a warrior. A custodian is a warrior, diplomat, investigator, and scholar all at once. His perfect mind capable of mastering any discipline he chooses to study. The training each receives reflects these capabilities. A Space Marine's training is rigorous, but ultimately focused on war. He learns tactics, weapons drill, squad maneuvers, planetary assault strategies. He becomes a master of combat in all its forms. But his education is specialized, focused on making him the perfect soldier. A custodian's training is broader and goes deeper. He learns everything a Space Marine learns, and then continues learning. Philosophy, art, history, science, all the accumulated knowledge of human civilization is open to him. He is expected to be as comfortable discussing the philosophical implications of the Emperor's imperial truth as he is disemboweling enemies with his guardian spear. This creates a being who is not merely superhuman physically, but superhuman intellectually and spiritually as well. The Space Marines are the Emperor's soldiers, bred for war and little else. The Custodians are the Emperor's companions, expected to be worthy of standing in his presence, of engaging him in conversation, of representing his will not just through force of arms, but through intellect and wisdom. They are Renaissance men, written in flesh and bone, warriors who can kill you with their hands or outsmart you in a philosophical debate, often simultaneously. All of these enhancements combine to create a warrior who operates on a level that Space Marines simply cannot match. In a straight fight, one-on-one, the Space Marine would be dead before he understood how completely he had been outclassed. The Custodian is faster, stronger, tougher, smarter. He anticipates every move. He sees every opening. His strikes land with force that the Space Marine's armor cannot fully absorb. His own armor turns aside blows that should be fatal. And when the Space Marine finally manages to land what should be a killing stroke, the Custodian fights on, his transhuman physiology refusing to acknowledge injuries that would drop an Astartes instantly. This is not a fair fight. This is a masterpiece fighting a production model. Both were made by the same creator, both serve the same master, but one was made with infinite care, and the other was made to be replicated 1,000,000 times. The gulf in capability is not an accident. It is by design, the inevitable result of the difference between mass production and individual perfection. The arsenal of terror, Auramite, and guardian spears. A warrior is only as effective as his weapons and armor allow him to be. And in this arena too, the Custodians stand far above even the mighty Space Marines. To understand the gulf in equipment, one must first understand the materials from which each force's war gear is crafted, and the philosophies that guide their creation. A Space Marine's armor and weapons are mass-produced to exacting standards, manufactured by the Adeptus Mechanicus in forge complexes spread across the galaxy. They are good, reliable, and proven across 10,000 years of warfare, but they are ultimately products of industrial manufacturing, created to outfit millions of warriors across thousands of chapters. A Custodian's equipment is created on Terra itself, in workshops known only to the armorsmiths who serve the 10,000, using techniques and materials that predate the Imperium and are shared with no one else. Each piece is unique, handcrafted specifically for the individual warrior who will wield it. A bespoke work of art that happens to be the deadliest weapon system in the Imperium's arsenal. The difference is fundamental, and it begins with the materials themselves. Space Marine power armor is constructed primarily from ceramite, a ceramic metallic composite that provides excellent protection against the weapons commonly encountered in the 41st millennium. Ceramite ablates under energy weapon fire, dissipating heat that would otherwise melt through metal. It can turn aside most projectile weapons, though sufficiently powerful rounds will eventually penetrate. It is relatively lightweight for its protective value, allowing the Space Marine inside to move with surprising speed despite being encased in what amounts to a walking tank. Marks of Space Marine armor have evolved over the millennia, each iteration improving slightly on the last, but the fundamental material and design principles remain constant. It is good armor. It keeps the wearer alive against the majority of threats they will face. Custodian armor is crafted from Auramite, a material so rare and so difficult to work with that its very existence is known to few outside Terra. Auramite's natural color is a lustrous gold, though through closely guarded alchemical processes, it can be tinted to any shade desired. It is almost inert at the quantum level, making it ideal for warriors who might find themselves fighting in proximity to psychic phenomena that would overload conventional protective gear. It is stronger than ceramite by an order of magnitude. Tests have shown that Auramite can withstand impacts that would shatter ceramite armor, can turn aside energy weapon fire that would melt through Space Marine plate, can resist warp energies that would corrupt lesser materials. But more than its defensive capabilities, Auramite represents a triumph of materials science that the Imperium has been unable to replicate on a large scale. Each suit of Custodian armor is worth a planet's ransom, incorporating not just Auramite but rare crystals, precision-engineered force field generators, sensor arrays that make Space Marine equipment seem primitive, and life support systems capable of sustaining the wearer in environments that would kill an Astartes in seconds. The armor is not merely protection. It is an integrated weapons platform, an advanced sensor suite, and a work of art so exquisitely crafted that each piece takes years to complete. The customization extends to every detail. Where Space Marine armor is sized and fitted to the wearer, but otherwise standardized, Custodian armor is built from the ground up for its specific owner. The armor learns his movements, adapts to his fighting style, becomes an extension of his body in ways that mass-produced ceramite never could. The gems set into the armor are individually mined from deep beneath Terra's surface, hand-cut by master artisans, their colors precisely chosen to represent the warrior's shield company and honor badges. When a Custodian switches shield companies, these gems are carefully removed and replaced, even in the smallest details. Perfection is the standard. The armor incorporates refraction field generators that create a defensive energy barrier around the wearer. When struck, these fields cause attacks to bend away at the last moment, bullets veering off course, blades sliding aside, even psychic attacks stuttering and failing. This is beyond anything available to the standard Space Marine. Only the most veteran warriors of the Astartes, Chapter Masters, and Forge Fathers have access to comparable technology, and even then, it is often inferior to the baseline equipment every Custodian carries into battle. The fields don't make the wearer invulnerable, but they add yet another layer of protection that enemies must overcome, another advantage in warriors already nearly impossible to kill. The weapons carried by the Custodes are similarly superior. The Guardian Spear has become synonymous with the Custodes themselves, a symbol of their office, as surely as the two-headed eagle represents the Imperium. But calling it simply a spear does the weapon a tremendous disservice. It is a masterwork of weapons engineering, combining a power weapon blade capable of cutting through armor and flesh with molecular precision, and an integrated bolter capable of laying down withering fire at range. But unlike the bolters carried by Space Marines, which fire .75 caliber mass-reactive rounds, the Guardian Spear's weapon fires specially crafted shells created only on Terra, each one more powerful and more reliable than anything available to the Astartes. The spear's blade is not merely sharpened metal. It generates a power field that disrupts matter at the molecular level, allowing the weapon to cut through armor that would stop a normal blade cold. A Guardian Spear can cleave through a Chaos Space Marine's power armor, through the enhanced flesh beneath, and out the other side in a single stroke. It can pierce the thick hide of an Orc warboss, punch through the exoskeleton of a Tyranid warrior, shear through the wraithbone armor of an Elder. There is no material in the galaxy, save perhaps adamantium, that can reliably withstand a Guardian Spear's edge when wielded by a warrior with a Custodian's strength and skill. But the true genius of the weapon lies in its versatility. In the hands of a Custodian, the Guardian Spear becomes a tool for every range and every situation. At distance, the integrated bolter provides suppressing fire, each shell capable of downing an armored opponent. At medium range, the spear can be thrown with enough force to impale multiple enemies, then recalled to the wielder's hand through magnetic systems built into his armor. At close range, the spear becomes a whirlwind of death, the Custodian spinning it in great arcs that cover impossible angles, the weapon's length giving him reach no sword could match, each strike potentially fatal. Space Marines carry specialized weapons for different situations. Tactical Marines have bolters for ranged combat and bolt pistols, plus melee weapons for close quarters. Assault Marines carry jump packs and close combat weapons. Devastators provide heavy weapon support. Each warrior is optimized for his role, and squads combine these specialties to create tactical flexibility. A Custodian carries his Guardian Spear and is instantly ready for any situation. He doesn't need a squad to provide him with capabilities he lacks. He is a complete weapons system unto himself. Some Custodians carry alternative weapons. The Castellan axe trades some of the spear's reach for increased striking power, capable of cleaving through even Terminator armor with a single blow. Sentinel blades are shorter, faster weapons for warriors who prefer speed over reach. But regardless of the specific weapon, each is handcrafted on Terra by master weaponsmiths who have spent their entire lives learning their craft. Each is individually balanced for its wielder. Each is maintained with a care that borders on religious devotion. A Space Marine's bolter might be serviced by a Tech Marine or even a trained serf. A Custodian maintains his own weapons personally, the care and upkeep a meditative practice that keeps him connected to the tools of his trade. Beyond their standard armament, Custodians have access to weapons that exist nowhere else in the Imperium. Adrathic weapons, which erase matter at the subatomic level, are forbidden to all except the Custodes. A target struck by an Adrathic beam doesn't merely die, it ceases to exist. Unmade at a fundamental level that makes even disintegration seem crude by comparison. These weapons represent technology from the dark age of technology, secrets so dangerous that the Emperor decreed only his personal guards would ever wield them. The Mechanicus has begged for access to this technology for millennia. The answer has always been no. Similarly, the Custodians employ other archaeotech weapons lost to the rest of the Imperium. Lastrum weapons that project beams of coherent light capable of burning through any known material. Compact melter weapons that can be integrated into Guardian spears, giving a Custodian the ability to eliminate armored targets without switching weapons. Plasma weapons of a quality and reliability that makes Mars's production models seem like primitive clubs by comparison. Every one of these weapons is maintained in perfect working order, free from the mechanical failures that plague even the best equipment available to the Space Marines. The vehicles and support equipment available to the Custodians reflect the same philosophy. Where Space Marines rely primarily on ground vehicles and occasionally aircraft, the Custodians have maintained anti-gravity technology that the rest of the Imperium largely lost after the Horus Heresy. Grav tanks, like the Caladius and Coronis patterns, hover over the battlefield, their advanced propulsion systems allowing them to ignore terrain that would stop a Space Marine Rhino cold. These vehicles mount weapons that would be considered heavy ordnance for any other force, yet the Custodians deploy them as standard equipment. Even something as simple as ammunition reveals the gulf in resources and capability. A Space Marine's bolter fires mass reactive shells that are manufactured to strict specifications across the Imperium. They are good rounds, reliable and effective, but they are, again, mass-produced. A Custodian's weapon fires shells crafted individually on Terra, each one tested to ensure perfect balance and function, each explosive charge precisely measured to maximize destructive potential. The difference might seem minor, but in combat, when a single shot could mean the difference between life and death, that extra margin of reliability and power matters. The maintenance and supply chain also differs drastically. A Space Marine chapter must maintain relationships with the Adeptus Mechanicus, must negotiate for weapons and equipment, must often make do with what they can acquire. During extended campaigns, ammunition runs low, weapons wear out, armor takes damage that cannot be fully repaired in the field. The Custodians answer only to the Emperor. They have access to the treasuries of Terra itself. If a Custodian's armor is damaged, it is repaired or replaced with no questions asked, no requisition forms, no political maneuvering. If his weapons need maintenance, the finest armor smiths on Terra are at his disposal. Resources that a chapter master would have to fight the administratum for months to acquire, a Custodian simply receives because his mission demands it. This difference in equipment is not merely about having better toys. It is about philosophy. The Space Marines were designed to fight across the galaxy, which means they need equipment that can be manufactured and maintained far from Terra, weapons that can be repaired in the field by technicians with standard training, armor that can be produced in quantities sufficient to outfit 1,000,000 warriors. The Custodians were designed to protect the Emperor, which means they need the absolute best equipment human science can produce, with no regard for cost or manufacturability. One is practical, the other is ideal. And in war, the ideal always outperforms the practical when resources are no object. When you combine superior equipment with superior warriors, the force multiplication becomes exponential rather than additive. A Space Marine in power armor with a bolter is a formidable opponent. A Custodian in Auramite armor wielding a Guardian spear is an order of magnitude deadlier, not because any single advantage is overwhelming, but because every advantage compounds with every other. He is faster, and his armor doesn't slow him down. He is stronger, and his weapon multiplies that strength. He is smarter, and his sensors provide him perfect battlefield awareness. He is more durable, and his equipment gives him multiple layers of protection. The arsenal of the Custodians represents the Imperium at its absolute peak, unconstrained by economics or production limitations, focused entirely on creating the most effective warriors possible. Against this, even the impressive equipment of the Adeptus Astartes seems crude. It is the difference between a well-made production sword and Excalibur. Both will cut, both will kill, but only one is legendary. Combat philosophy: champions versus soldiers. The difference between a Custodian and a Space Marine extends beyond mere physical capability or superior equipment. It reaches into the very core of how each approaches warfare, how they think about combat, how they train, and ultimately how they fight. This distinction in combat philosophy is perhaps the most fundamental difference between these two breeds of transhuman warrior, and it explains why one Custodian can stand against 100 Space Marines, where sheer physical superiority alone would not suffice. A Space Marine is, first and foremost, a soldier. He is trained from the moment of his induction to think in terms of unit cohesion, squad tactics, and combined arms warfare. When a scout is elevated to a full battle brother, he joins a tactical squad, and everything about his training reinforces the importance of working within that squad structure. He learns to lay down covering fire for his brothers. He learns to advance under fire while others suppress the enemy. He learns the 1,000 small coordinations that allow 10 warriors to function as a single organism, each man covering the other's blind spots, each warrior trusting his brothers to be where they need to be when they need to be there. This extends upward through the chapter hierarchy. Tactical squads combine into companies. Companies coordinate into battle groups. The entire chapter functions as an integrated military force, each element supporting the others. A Space Marine captain doesn't just command his company, he coordinates with other captains, with the chapter master, with auxiliary forces and allied Imperial Guard regiments. Space Marine warfare is inherently collaborative. Even the most elite formations, the Death Watch or the Grey Knights, operate as squads and task forces, relying on coordination and mutual support to overcome threats that would overwhelm individual warriors. This approach has been refined over 10 millennia of warfare. It is incredibly effective. A squad of Space Marines can achieve objectives that would require an entire Guard regiment to accomplish. A company can conquer worlds. A chapter can turn the tide of entire wars. The Codex Astartes, written by Reboot Guilliman himself, codifies these tactics into a framework that has proven itself across countless battles. Squad-level tactics, company-level strategies, and chapter-wide coordination have become second nature to the Adeptus Astartes. They are, without question, the finest military organization humanity has ever produced. But this strength is also, in a subtle way, a limitation. A Space Marine fighting alone is still formidable, but he is not at his best. He is trained to operate with support, to expect his battle brothers to cover his flanks, to rely on combined fire to overwhelm tough opponents. When isolated, when cut off from his squad, a Space Marine must adapt to a situation he was not primarily designed for. He can do it. His training and transhuman capabilities make him deadly in any circumstance, but it is not his optimal operating environment. A Custodian approaches combat from an entirely different philosophical foundation. He is not a soldier, he is a champion. Where a Space Marine is trained to be one part of a greater whole, a Custodian is trained to be complete unto himself. His education in warfare does not emphasize squad tactics or unit cohesion. Instead, it focuses on individual mastery, on perfecting every aspect of personal combat, until he needs no support, no backup, no coordination with others to achieve victory. This begins with weapons training that is vastly more comprehensive than what Space Marines receive. A Space Marine specializes. A tactical Marine is expert with his bolter and competent with his combat knife or chainsword. An Assault Marine masters close combat weapons and jump pack tactics. A Devastator becomes intimately familiar with heavy weapons. Each warrior knows his role and trains to excel in it. A Custodian masters everything. Every weapon in the Custodes' arsenal is part of his training. Guardian spears, Castellan axes, sentinel blades, storm shields, bolters, plasma guns, melter guns, power fists. He learns them all, practices with them all, until he can switch between weapon types without conscious thought, until each becomes an extension of his will. More than that, he learns to fight in every environment, against every possible opponent. Space Marines train primarily for planetary surface warfare, with specialized training for void combat, urban warfare, and other specific scenarios as needed. Custodians train for everything simultaneously. Gravity environments from 0G to crushing high-G worlds. Atmospheres from vacuum to toxin-saturated hellscapes. Against opponents ranging from unarmored humans to greater demons. Every possible scenario is drilled until the Custodian has no weaknesses, no gaps in his capability, no situation where he is anything less than supremely effective. The mental aspect of this training is equally important. A Space Marine is conditioned to trust his brothers, to rely on the squad, to find strength in unity. A Custodian is conditioned to trust only himself. This is not arrogance, it is necessity. When you guard the Emperor, when you stand between the master of mankind and every possible threat, you cannot afford to have blind spots. You cannot rely on someone else covering your six. You must be aware of everything, anticipating every angle of attack, prepared to face overwhelming odds alone, because there might not be time for reinforcements to arrive. This manifests in combat as a completely different fighting style. When Space Marines engage an enemy, they do so in coordinated fashion. Tactical Marines advance in fire teams, one element suppressing while the other moves. Assault Marines time their charges to hit simultaneously from multiple angles. Devastators provide covering fire from prepared positions. It is beautiful in its efficiency, a well-oiled machine of death that can dismantle enemy formations with surgical precision. When a Custodian engages an enemy, he does so as a whirlwind of individual prowess. He doesn't wait for support because he doesn't need support. He identifies the greatest threat on the battlefield and moves to eliminate it. His Guardian spear spinning in patterns that seem impossible, each strike killing or crippling. He doesn't hold ground waiting for reinforcements. He takes ground through sheer personal dominance. His tactics are not about coordination with others, but about perfect execution of his own capabilities. He is simultaneously the assault element, the suppressing fire, and the reserve force. He is the entire battlefield equation compressed into a single warrior. This difference becomes starkest when you consider how each force approaches a combat scenario. Place a squad of 10 Space Marines in an urban environment with orders to eliminate an enemy command post. They will use standard tactics, advance by fire teams, one team covering while the other moves. Clear buildings room by room with practiced efficiency. Lay down suppressing fire to fix enemy units in place, while other elements maneuver for killing shots. Bring up heavy weapons to eliminate fortified positions. It will be methodical, effective, and relatively safe for the Marines involved, their casualties minimized by coordination and mutual support. Place a single Custodian in the same scenario. He doesn't advance by fire and movement because he doesn't need covering fire. He moves through the battlefield like a force of nature, his augmented senses providing perfect awareness of enemy positions, his superhuman speed allowing him to cover ground before defenders can react, his Guardian spear providing both ranged and melee capability without changing weapons. He doesn't clear rooms methodically, he flows through them faster than the eye can follow, each room containing only corpses by the time he exits. He doesn't fix enemies in place. He eliminates them so quickly that suppression becomes unnecessary. The mission would be complete in a fraction of the time with no need for support or coordination. This isn't to say that Custodians cannot work together. When they do deploy in numbers, they are devastating, but their cooperation is fundamentally different from Space Marine squad tactics. Space Marines rely on predetermined formations and practiced maneuvers. Custodians cooperate like master duelists, fighting side by side. each maintaining his own engagement while being aware of his companions' positions, flowing around each other without explicit coordination, because each trusts the others to maintain their own spheres of combat dominance. The training that creates these different combat philosophies is reflected in every aspect of how each force prepares for war. Space Marine training emphasizes drill, repetition of squad-level maneuvers until they become second nature. They practice breaching and clearing. They run fire and movement exercises. They train in squad-level tactics until they can execute complex maneuvers without needing verbal orders. The emphasis is on creating a cohesive unit where each part knows its role and trusts the other parts to fulfill theirs. Custodian training is more akin to the education of a Renaissance master. Yes, they drill in weapons and tactics, but they also study philosophy, history, art, strategy at the highest levels. They learn not just how to kill, but why they kill, the deeper purpose behind their mission. Each custodian is expected to be a scholar as well as a warrior. To understand the Imperium, they protect not just militarily, but culturally, politically, philosophically. They are meant to be worthy companions of the Emperor himself, capable of conversing on any topic, of representing his will through intellect as well as force. This creates warriors who think differently about combat. A Space Marine executes orders and mission parameters with perfect discipline. A custodian interprets broader strategic intent and determines his own optimal path to achieving it. When Constantine Valdor commanded custodians, he did not issue detailed tactical orders. He explained the objective and trusted each warrior to accomplish it through whatever means he deemed best. This level of autonomy would be unthinkable in a Space Marine company, where discipline and following orders are sacred principles. The different philosophies also affect how each force handles casualties and setbacks. Space Marines are trained to hold their position, to die if necessary to complete the mission. They will sacrifice themselves to buy time for their brothers, knowing that the squad, the company, the chapter will carry on. Their perspective is collective. Victory is what matters, not individual survival. A custodian is trained to survive, to adapt, to find a way to win even in impossible circumstances. Each one is too valuable, too irreplaceable to spend lightly. They are expected to achieve the objective and survive, not because they fear death, but because they represent such an investment in time and resources that their loss is itself a strategic defeat. This manifests in different levels of acceptable risk. A Space Marine captain might order a company to hold a position to the last man, knowing that their sacrifice will enable a larger victory. The Emperor would never give such an order to his custodians except in the most dire circumstances, and even then, he would expect them to find a way to survive. During the war, within the Webway, when custodians were dying in droves against endless demon hordes, the Emperor himself fought beside them, trying to minimize their casualties, because each death represented not just the loss of a warrior, but the loss of decades of work and an irreplaceable piece of his personal protection. This difference in combat philosophy creates warriors optimized for different types of warfare. Space Marines excel at large-scale military operations. They can conquer worlds, can wage extended campaigns, can hold territory against sustained assault. Their tactics and training make them ideal for the Imperium's endless wars of expansion and defense across the galaxy. But put them in a situation that requires individual excellence rather than unit cohesion, and cracks begin to show. They are still deadly, but they are not at their absolute best. Custodians excel at precisely those scenarios where Space Marine tactics break down. Assassination missions, where a single target must be eliminated without alerting an entire army. Defensive scenarios where one warrior must hold a critical choke point alone against overwhelming odds. Rescue operations, where a single agent must penetrate enemy lines without support. Any situation requiring individual supremacy rather than collective power favors the custodian's training and philosophy. When you pit one Custodian against 100 Space Marines, you are creating a scenario that plays to the Custodian's strengths and against the Space Marines' training. The Marines are designed to work together, but in this scenario, that coordination becomes a weakness. They must worry about firing lines, about not hitting each other, about maintaining formation. The Custodian has no such concerns. He flows through combat like water, his awareness perfect, his tactics adaptable in real time, his capabilities uncompromised by the need to coordinate with anyone else. He is fighting exactly the kind of battle he was bred and trained for. One warrior against impossible odds, with no support, no backup, nothing but his own supreme skill, and the absolute belief that he cannot, will not, fail. This is why the ratio of 1 Custodian to 100 Space Marines is not absurd. It is a reflection of fundamental differences in purpose and philosophy. The Space Marines are the Emperor's army, and like any army, they are strongest in numbers, in coordination, in combined arms. The Custodes are the Emperor's champions, and champions stand alone. They need no one. They are complete. And that completeness, that individual perfection, is worth 100 soldiers, no matter how enhanced those soldiers might be. The Webway War, hell beneath the palace. If you want to understand the true measure of the Adeptus Custodes, to comprehend in visceral terms why they stand so far above even the Space Marines, you need look no further than the war within the Webway. For 5 years, while the Horus heresy raged across the galaxy and brothers fought brothers in the bloodiest civil war humanity had ever known, another conflict raged in secret beneath the Imperial Palace. In the labyrinthine corridors of the Webway, that ancient network of tunnels created by the Old Ones, 10,000 golden warriors fought against impossible odds in a war that would have broken any other force. This was the crucible that proved the worth of the Custodes beyond any doubt. The war began when Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Sons, attempted to warn the Emperor of Horus's betrayal. Magnus, desperate to reach his father with news of the brewing treachery, used forbidden sorcery to pierce the psychic wards protecting Terra. His message reached the Emperor, but at terrible cost. The psychic shields around the Webway portal beneath the Imperial Palace shattered, the wards that had kept the warp at bay fractured, and through those fractures, the legions of chaos poured in an endless tide. The Emperor had been working on the Webway, attempting to create a human passage through its tunnels that would free humanity from reliance on warp travel. The project represented the culmination of his vision for the species, a way to break the hold that chaos had over human civilization by removing the need to travel through the warp itself. Thousands of tech priests and servitors labored in the tunnels, constructing the human sections of the Webway, extending its reach, creating the infrastructure that would revolutionize the Imperium. When the wards fell, all of that work became a doorway for demons. The Emperor's response was immediate. He descended from his throne and took personal command of the defense, but even he could not be everywhere at once. The Webway was vast, the demon incursion spreading through its tunnels like an infection. He needed warriors he could trust absolutely, warriors capable of holding the line against the endless hordes of the warp. He called upon his custodians, along with the Sisters of Silence, whose null fields could push back the warp's influence, and ordered them to hold the Webway at any cost. What followed was a war of attrition that would have destroyed any other force. The demons came in waves that had no end, pouring through the breaches in reality like water through a sieve. Bloodletters of Khorne, shrieking and howling for skulls. Plague-bearers of Nurgle, their diseased touch corrupting everything they touched. Horrors of Tzeentch, reality warping around them as they advanced. Demonettes of Slaanesh, impossibly quick and deadly. And behind them, greater daemons, towering monsters that could kill a squad of Space Marines with a single blow. They came in numbers that defied counting, and they came without cease. The Custodians established defensive lines in the Webway tunnels, building barricades across the ancient passages, fortifying choke points, creating kill zones where their firepower could be most effective. Behind these lines, the tech priests worked frantically to repair the damaged sections of tunnel and seal the rifts from which demons spawned. In front of the lines, the custodians and sisters launched preemptive strikes, hitting daemon concentrations before they could mass for assault, keeping the enemy off balance, buying time for the repairs to continue. The pattern of combat settled into a brutal routine. The custodians would hold a position until it became untenable, then fall back to the next prepared defensive line, conducting a fighting withdrawal that cost the demons dearly for every foot of ground gained. Sometimes the demons would break through, and desperate battles would rage as custodians counterattacked to seal the breach before demons could reach the tech priests and civilian workers. More than once, daemon assaults reached all the way to the Golden Gate itself, the portal that led into the Imperial Palace, and only desperate last stands by the custodians prevented chaos from invading Terra directly. The toll on the defenders was horrific. Custodians are nearly invulnerable by conventional standards, but in the webway they faced enemies that ignored conventional rules of reality. Demon claws could pierce auramite. Warp fire could burn even custodian flesh. Psychic attacks could overwhelm even their formidable mental defenses when concentrated by multiple greater demons. And the demons just kept coming, wave after wave, assault after assault, with no pause, no mercy, no end. By the standards of any military force, the losses should have broken them. 90% casualties. 9 out of every 10 custodians who entered the webway died there. Tribune after tribune fell. Ancient warriors who had stood watch over the Emperor since before the Primarchs were scattered died with their duty unfulfilled. These were not the expendable soldiers of the Imperial Guard, where a 90% casualty rate was considered an acceptable price for victory. These were the Custodes, each one irreplaceable, each one representing decades of work and the personal attention of the Emperor himself. And they held. Through weeks that became months, months that became years, the Custodians stood their ground. When one fell, his brothers closed the gap and fought on. When entire companies were annihilated, the survivors reformed and continued the battle. They slept for hours at a time in their armor, ate when they could snatch a moment between assaults, fought with wounds that would have killed Space Marines, all to buy one more hour, one more day, one more week for the Emperor's great work to be completed. The specific battles within the webway demonstrate the level of combat capability that sets Custodians apart. At the impossible city of Kalistar, an ancient elder settlement within the webway, a force of Custodians and sisters held off demon armies supported by traitor Space Marines and corrupted Titans. These were not the relatively weak cultists and renegades that Imperial forces often face. These were veteran warriors of the traitor legions, enhanced by warp blessings, leading armies of demons with tactical skill that matched anything the Loyalists could field. And behind them came the Titans, war machines the size of buildings, their weapons capable of leveling fortresses. The Custodians fought them all. Guardian spears against demon claws, auramite armor against warp fire, transhuman reflexes against entities that existed partially outside normal time and space. Individual Custodians would hold tunnels single-handedly against demon swarms, their spears blurring through impossible patterns, creating walls of death that nothing could cross. When ammunition ran low, they fought with blades alone. When their weapons broke, they fought with their hands. And when they finally fell, they fell still killing, their last acts taking enemies with them into the dark. Compare this to how Space Marines handle extended combat. An Astartes chapter engaged in an extended campaign will rotate troops, ensuring that warriors get rest between engagements. They establish supply lines, bringing in fresh ammunition and equipment. They call for reinforcement when losses mount. This is sound military practice, the kind of sustainable warfare that allows a force to maintain combat effectiveness over extended periods. The Custodians in the webway had none of these luxuries. There was no rotation, there were no supply lines, except what could be carried forward to the fighting lines. There were no reinforcements. Every custodian on Terra was already in the webway. And yet, they fought on for years. The mental toll alone should have been catastrophic. Humans are not meant to fight constantly without rest, to exist in a state of perpetual combat stress, to watch their companions die day after day with no end in sight. Space Marines are conditioned to handle stress, their hypno-indoctrination and psychological training allowing them to function in combat situations that would break normal humans. But even Space Marines have limits. Extended combat produces battlefield fatigue, cumulative stress that degrades performance over time. Most Space Marine deployments are measured in weeks or months, with rest periods in between. The Custodians fought for years in the webway without meaningful rest, and they never broke. Their discipline never wavered. Their combat effectiveness remained at peak levels even after months of continuous warfare. They adapted to the endless horror of fighting demons, learned the patterns of enemy attacks, developed new tactics specifically for webway combat. Where a normal force would have collapsed psychologically, where even Space Marines would have shown signs of fatigue and degraded performance, the Custodians grew only more effective as the war continued. This speaks to the mental engineering that created them. A Space Marine's mind is conditioned to handle extreme stress, but the Custodian's mind is built to transcend it entirely. They do not experience fear in combat. They do not feel the cumulative weight of endless battle. Their consciousness exists in a state of perfect clarity, regardless of external circumstances. Where a Space Marine might begin to slow down after months of continuous fighting, his reactions degrading by microseconds, his judgment becoming slightly impaired by exhaustion, a Custodian maintains absolute peak performance indefinitely. The war finally ended when the Emperor himself intervened directly, descending into the webway and burning a path through the demon hordes with psychic fire that unmade reality itself. For a single day, he fought at the side of his Custodians. And in that day, he demonstrated why even the greatest of demons flee from his presence. The surviving Custodians were reinvigorated by fighting beside their master, and together they drove the demons back far enough to seal the webway portal, closing the gate that had threatened to drown Terra in an endless tide of chaos. But the cost was devastating. Of the 10,000 Custodians who had entered the webway at the start of the war, fewer than 1,000 remained alive. The rest lay dead in the tunnels, their gene-crafted bodies finally overwhelmed by enemies beyond counting. Each death was a strategic disaster, representing not just the loss of a warrior, but decades of irreplaceable work. The Emperor had to abandon his webway project, had to seal the portal and sit upon the golden throne for eternity, just to maintain the seal. His dream of freeing humanity from the warp died in those tunnels, along with 9,000 of his finest warriors. And yet, despite the horrific casualties, despite the abandonment of the webway project, despite the incalculable cost in blood and dreams, the war was a testament to what the Custodians can achieve. They held, for 5 years, against impossible odds, with no reinforcement and no respite, they held. A force of Space Marines, even Astartes, as legendary as the Imperial Fists or Blood Angels, would have been annihilated in the first year. The strategic defensive positions would have collapsed. The demon hordes would have broken through to Terra. The Imperium would have fallen not to Horus's betrayal, but to a demon incursion that erupted from the very heart of the Imperial Palace. The Custodians prevented this. They held the line when holding the line seemed impossible. They fought when fighting seemed futile. They died by the thousands, and the survivors fought on. This is the measure of the Custodians, the proof of their worth, written in the blood of demons and heroes alike. No Space Marine chapter could have done what they did. No force in the Imperium, save perhaps the Emperor himself, could have withstood what they withstood. When people question whether one custodian is really worth 100 Space Marines. When they doubt the mathematics of that comparison, the war within the webway provides the answer. These are warriors who held off literally endless armies for 5 years. These are warriors who maintained combat effectiveness at 90% casualties. These are warriors who fought beside the Emperor himself and proved worthy of that honor. The 100-to-1 ratio is not propaganda, it is an underestimation. Legends in Gold, Constantine Valdor, and others. To speak of the Adeptus Custodes is to speak of legends made flesh, of warriors whose deeds have passed into myth even though they walk among the living still. Among these golden paragons, certain names stand out, warriors whose accomplishments demonstrate in specific, undeniable terms the supremacy of the Custodian Guard over even the mighty Space Marines. The greatest of these, the shining exemplar against which all others are measured, is Constantine Valdor, first Captain General of the Legio Custodes, the Shield of the Emperor, the first of the 10,000. Constantine Valdor's story begins in the earliest days of the Unification Wars, before there was an Imperium, before the Space Marine legions existed, when Terra was still a fragmented world of techno-barbarian kingdoms and warlord states. The Emperor was not yet Emperor, merely the most powerful of many warlords seeking to unite humanity under his banner. At his side walked Constantine Valdor, already bearing the golden armor that would become synonymous with the Custodes, already wielding the Apollonian spear, a weapon said to have been crafted by the Emperor's own hands. From these earliest days, Valdor distinguished himself not just through combat prowess, though his skill with a blade was unmatched, but through his strategic genius and unwavering loyalty. He commanded the first Custodian formations, organized their training and deployment, established the protocols and traditions that would guide the Custodes for the next 10,000 years. As the Emperor conquered Terra nation by nation, Valdor was always at his side, not as a mere bodyguard, but as companion and confidant. When the Emperor spoke of his plans for humanity, Valdor listened and understood. When strategies needed to be discussed, Valdor offered counsel that even the Emperor valued. By the time the Great Crusade began and the Space Marine legions took to the stars, Constantine Valdor had earned a reputation that made even the Primarchs take notice. His list of names, earned through valorous deeds according to Custodian tradition, numbered in the hundreds. By the time of the Horus Heresy, he had earned 1,932 separate names, each commemorating a specific act of heroism, a particular victory, a moment when he had exceeded even the high standards expected of a custodian. By the 41st millennium, there are books that contain nothing but Constantine Valdor's full name, volumes upon volumes of titles and honors that few could even pronounce in full. His combat capabilities set the standard by which all custodians are measured. During the Horus Heresy, loyalist Space Marines who witnessed Valdor in combat described him reaving through traitor Astartes as easily as they themselves would cut down ordinary humans. Think about that comparison for a moment. A Space Marine considers baseline humans to be essentially non-threats in combat, children wielding sticks against armored giants. This is how veteran Astartes, warriors with centuries of combat experience, described watching Constantine Valdor fight Chaos Space Marines. The traitors, enhanced by warp blessings and fighting with the desperation of the damned, were children before him. Specific engagements demonstrate this supremacy in concrete terms. During the Siege of Terra, when Horus's forces had finally reached the walls of the Imperial Palace and the fate of humanity hung in the balance, Constantine Valdor led his custodians in the defense of the Eternity Gate, the massive portal leading to the Sanctum Imperialis, where the Emperor sat upon the Golden Throne. The traitor forces that assaulted this position were not conventional armies. They were the elite of the traitor legions, veterans who had fought across the galaxy, enhanced by years of warp exposure and demonic blessings. They came in waves that numbered in the thousands. Supported by corrupted titans, and demon engines. Valdor held the gate. Records from the siege describe him as a golden blur, his Apollonian spear moving too fast for the human eye to track, each strike killing or crippling. He fought for days without rest, without respite, his armor covered in the blood of traitors and demons alike, and the Eternity Gate never fell. At one point, a greater demon of chaos, a bloodthirster of Khorne, large enough to tear apart squads of space marines with its bare hands, broke through the defensive lines. Constantin Valdor engaged it in single combat, while his custodians held back the demon's lesser followers. The fight lasted mere minutes. The demon was banished back to the warp, its physical form destroyed by the Apollonian spear, and Valdor fought on as if the duel had never interrupted his defensive duties. When the Emperor finally teleported to Horus's flagship for the final confrontation, Constantin Valdor was among those chosen to accompany him. The strike force that boarded the vengeful spirit included space marines from multiple legions, warriors selected as the absolute best humanity had to offer. And yet it was Valdor, more than any save perhaps the Emperor himself, who cut the deepest into Horus's forces. He led his custodians through the corrupted corridors of the flagship, fighting word-bearers and sons of Horus, who had been enhanced beyond even typical Chaos Space Marine standards. In one documented engagement, Valdor and a handful of custodians found themselves surrounded by over 30 elite Justaeran Terminators, the best warriors of Horus's own first company, led by Abaddon himself. These were not ordinary Chaos Space Marines. These were veterans of the entire crusade, warriors who had fought alongside Horus for decades, now wearing Terminator armor and wielding weapons blessed by the Chaos gods. The fight should have been a massacre, the custodians overwhelmed by sheer numbers and the power of their opponents. Instead, Constantin Valdor and his warriors cut through them like a scythe through wheat. The Apollonian spear, that legendary weapon, pierced Terminator plate as if it were unarmored flesh. Valdor moved with a speed that defied belief, his transhuman reflexes allowing him to parry attacks from multiple directions simultaneously, his counterstrikes killing with surgical precision. Even when he was wounded, when 6 Justaeran managed to pin him down and the traitor champion Hellas Sykar drove a power sword through his armor, Valdor fought on. He freed himself, killed Sykar and the 6 Terminators holding him, and still managed to wound Abaddon, cutting the future Warmaster with the Apollonian spear in a strike that nearly ended the Despoiler's existence centuries before he would become the Imperium's greatest mortal threat. This engagement demonstrates several crucial points about Custodian capabilities. First, even when outnumbered more than 30-1 by elite Chaos Space Marines in Terminator armor, the Custodians not only survived but won. Second, wounds that would have incapacitated or killed a Space Marine merely slowed Valdor down. A power sword through his body was an injury he fought through, continuing combat while literally impaled. Third, even Abaddon, who would go on to become perhaps the deadliest mortal champion of Chaos, could not match Constantin Valdor in direct combat. The future Warmaster needed the assistance of dozens of elite warriors and warp-infused blessings from Erebus just to survive the encounter. But Valdor's legacy extends beyond personal combat prowess. As Captain General, he commanded the entirety of the Legio Custodes with a strategic acumen that rivaled the Primarchs themselves. During the Webway War, while the Emperor maintained the psychic barriers holding back the full fury of the warp, it was Valdor who organized the defense, who positioned the Custodians and Sisters of Silence for maximum effectiveness, who personally led counterattacks to relieve pressure at critical moments. His tactical decisions during those 5 years of hell kept the Custodian force intact long enough to accomplish their mission, a feat of command that no Space Marine commander could have matched given the catastrophic casualty rates involved. His relationship with the Primarchs is particularly telling. Several Primarchs, including Leman Russ and Rogel Dawn, fought alongside Valdor during the heresy. These were demigods, the Emperor's Jeansons, beings of power so far beyond even Space Marines that comparison becomes meaningless. Yet they treated Constantin Valdor as an equal, or near enough. When Valdor spoke, they listened. When he offered tactical advice, they considered it carefully. There are whispered accounts in the lore that some Primarchs privately believed Valdor could have stood toe-to-toe with one of them in combat, that the Emperor's firstborn champion was a match for the Genesons themselves. This belief was not without foundation. During the mission to Prospero, where the Space Wolves were sent to bring Magnus the Red to account for violating the Council of Nicaea's prohibition on sorcery, Constantin Valdor accompanied Leman Russ. When the Space Wolves engaged the Thousand Sons, Valdor and his Custodians fought alongside them, and it was noted that the Custodians' kill ratio vastly exceeded even that of the legendary Space Wolves. Where a Space Wolf might kill 3,000 Sons in an engagement, a Custodian killed 10. Where a Grey Hunter struggled against 1,000 Sons Terminator, a Custodian cut them down like children. Valdor personally slew multiple powerful Psykers of the Thousand Sons, warriors whose sorcery could turn Space Marines to ash or twist their minds into madness. The psychic powers that made the Thousand Sons so deadly were ineffective against Valdor's iron will and the protective properties of his auramite armor. He shrugged off mind attacks that would have left Space Marines gibbering wrecks, walked through warp fire that melted ceramite, and cut down sorcerers who had centuries of experience wielding powers that defied reality itself. His ultimate fate remains one of the greatest mysteries of the Imperium. After the Emperor's interment upon the Golden Throne, after the Horus heresy had ended and the Imperium began its long decline into the Age of Imperium, Constantin Valdor resigned his position as Captain General. He passed command to his successor and then, one night, simply walked out of the Imperial Palace. The greatest warrior humanity had ever produced, a being who had served the Emperor since before the Primarchs existed, disappeared without explanation. Some believe he died in service on a mission so secret that its nature remains hidden, even from the Custodes themselves. Others whisper that he still lives, operating in the shadows, perhaps leading a secret war against threats that the Imperium cannot officially acknowledge. There are accounts, vague and unconfirmed, of a figure called the King in Yellow, who appears at crucial moments in Imperial history, a golden warrior who arrives when hope seems lost, turns the tide of battle, and then vanishes before he can be identified. Whether this figure is Constantin Valdor or merely legend, built upon the foundation of his memory, no one can say with certainty. But Valdor is not the only legendary Custodian whose deeds demonstrate their supremacy over the Astartes. Ra Endymion, a tribune of the Legio Custodes, commanded the defense of the Webway after the Emperor was forced to ascend to the Golden Throne. He led the Custodians through the final evacuation of the Webway tunnels, covering the retreat against demon forces that vastly outnumbered his warriors. In the end, the Emperor entrusted Ra with the most terrible burden, containing the demon Drachnion, an entity so powerful that even the master of mankind could not destroy it. Ra accepted the demon into his own body, becoming its prison, and then fled deep into the Webway, carrying this terrible curse away from Terra, ensuring that it could never threaten the Emperor. His sacrifice saved the Imperium at the cost of his own existence, and his ultimate fate remains unknown. Trajan Valoris, the current Captain General in the 41st Millennium, has proven himself worthy of his legendary predecessors. He led the defense of the Imperial Palace during the Battle of Lion's Gate, when cornate demons breached the walls of the palace itself, the first time in 10,000 years that the inner sanctums had been threatened directly. Valoris personally slew 3 greater demons in single combat during that engagement, feats that would be considered legendary for entire companies of Space Marines. His strategic leadership during the opening years of the Indomitus Crusade, coordinating Custodian forces across the galaxy while maintaining the defense of Terra, has demonstrated the same level of tactical genius that characterized Valdor's command. The Battle of Gyros Thravian, though it occurred during the Great Crusade, deserves special mention as perhaps the single most dramatic demonstration of Custodian superiority over any other fighting force. The Emperor and his Custodians engaged an Orc warband led by Garkle Blackfang, one of the most powerful Orc warlords ever encountered. This was not a small raiding party. This was a green tide numbering in the hundreds of thousands, a force so massive and so well led that it had already defeated elements of the Sons of Horus, Death Guard, and Imperial Fists. The Custodians, numbering perhaps a few hundred at most, engaged this Orc horde in direct combat. The kill ratio they achieved is almost beyond belief, 100,000 to 3. For every 3 Custodians who fell in that battle, they had slain 33,000 Orcs. Let that sink in. Each Custodian who died in that engagement had personally killed approximately 10,000 enemies, even accounting for the fact that the Emperor himself fought in that battle, which certainly skewed the numbers. The Custodian contribution to the slaughter was immense. Compare this to typical Space Marine kill ratios. A Space Marine company fighting an Orc horde might achieve kill ratios of 100 to 1 or perhaps 200 to 1 if they have good position and sufficient ammunition. These are considered excellent results, the kind of performance that gets commemorated in chapter histories. The Custodians at Gyros Thravian achieved ratios 50 times higher. This is not incremental improvement. This is a difference so vast it defies comprehension. These legendary figures and their impossible achievements provide concrete evidence for the abstract comparisons we've been making. When we say that one Custodian is worth 100 Space Marines, these are not theoretical numbers pulled from thin air. They are conservative estimates based on actual combat performance across thousands of engagements spanning 10 millennia. Constantine Valdor, cutting through elite Chaos Space Marines like they were children. Ra Endymion, holding defensive lines against demon armies that should have overwhelmed his forces in minutes. Trajan Valoris, killing multiple greater demons in single combat. The Battle of Gyros Thravian's impossible kill ratios. These warriors and their deeds form the golden thread that runs through Imperial history. A constant reminder that humanity, when perfected through the Emperor's genetic genius, can stand against any threat the galaxy offers. They are living proof that the ratio of 100 to 1 is not hyperbole, but historical fact, demonstrated time and again on battlefields across the Imperium. The Space Marines are legends. The Custodians are legends among legends, warriors whose mere existence defies belief, even in a galaxy where demigods walk and demons manifest from nightmares. The mathematics of supremacy. The claim that a single Custodian equals 100 Space Marines seems, at first hearing, absurd. Surely no single warrior, no matter how enhanced, could stand against such overwhelming numbers. Surely the coordination and combined firepower of 100 Astartes would overwhelm even the most skilled opponent. And yet, this ratio, far from being propaganda or exaggeration, is actually a conservative estimate based on historical performance and direct statements from the Emperor himself. To understand why requires examining both the empirical evidence from battles and the theoretical foundations upon which these warriors were built. The most direct statement comes from the Emperor himself, recorded during the Great Crusade. The master of mankind, who created both the Primarchs and designed the genetic template for the Space Marines, who understood the capabilities of his creations better than anyone, stated that he would rather watch 1,000 Space Marines die than lose a single Custodian. This was not hyperbole spoken in a moment of emotion. The Emperor does not engage in hyperbole. This was a cold calculation of strategic value, a statement about the relative worth of these warriors in the grand equation of the Imperium's survival, 1,000 to 1. That is the Emperor's own assessment of the ratio, not 100, 1,000. The 100 to 1 comparison that forms the title of this script is actually selling the Custodians short by an order of magnitude. But let us examine the more conservative ratio, the 100 to 1 figure, and see if it holds up under scrutiny. Start with basic combat mathematics. A Space Marine, properly equipped and positioned, can hold a defensive position against approximately 10 to 20 conventional soldiers, assuming those soldiers have standard military weapons and training. This ratio has been established through thousands of engagements across the Imperium's history. A squad of 10 Space Marines, working together with proper tactics, can effectively engage a force 100 to 200 strong and expect to win, assuming the enemy is not similarly enhanced. Now scale upward. 100 Space Marines represents 10 full squads, a force capable of conquering small worlds, of holding entire city sectors against conventional armies, of breaking enemy formations that number in the tens of thousands. This is not a small force. This is a battle group that Space Marine chapters would deploy for significant operations, a concentration of force that represents serious combat power by any standard. A single Custodian faces this force alone. No squad tactics, no supporting fire, no ability to coordinate attacks or concentrate force. It is one warrior against 100, and yet the historical record shows that this fight is, at best, even odds. How is this possible? The answer lies in understanding that the advantages of the Custodian are not merely additive, but multiplicative. He is not just a little bit faster, a little bit stronger, a little bit more skilled. He is faster by enough that he can engage multiple opponents simultaneously. He is stronger by enough that his strikes punch through ceramite armor. He is skilled enough that he makes no wasted movements, commits no tactical errors, exploits every opening. And all of these advantages combine and multiply each other to create combat effectiveness that scales non-linearly with the increase in capability. Consider the scenario in detail. 100 Space Marines arrayed against a single Custodian. The Marines have the advantage of numbers, of combined fire, of the ability to coordinate their attacks. In theory, they could simply overwhelm him through massed bolter fire, creating a storm of explosive rounds that no armor could withstand. This is what their training would suggest, what their tactical doctrine demands. Concentrate fire, eliminate the target, move on. But implementation is where theory breaks down. Those 100 Marines cannot all shoot at once. They would be hitting each other. They must maintain spacing, create firing lines, coordinate their attacks to avoid fratricide. This takes time, even fractions of seconds. But in combat against a Custodian, fractions of seconds are eternities. By the time they have organized their lines, he has already moved, his superhuman speed carrying him into their midst before they can bring their weapons to bear effectively. Once in close combat, the Marines' numerical advantage becomes a liability. They cannot fire without hitting each other. They cannot maneuver effectively in the press of bodies. Their squad tactics, so effective against conventional enemies, become hindered by their own numbers. They get in each other's way, block each other's sightlines, prevent each other from engaging effectively. Meanwhile, the Custodian flows through combat like water, his guardian spear a blur of death, each strike killing or crippling, his auramite armor turning aside the desperate melee attacks of opponents who realize, too late, that they are not the predators in this engagement. The combat mathematics become starkly apparent when you consider specific metrics. In the time it takes a Space Marine to aim and fire his bolter, the Custodian has already killed 3 of his battle brothers and moved to a new position. In the second, it takes a Marine to register that his squad mates have fallen and adjust his tactics. Another 5 are dead. By the time the Marines coordinate a coherent response to the threat in their midst, a quarter of their number are casualties, and the survivors are in disarray. This is not speculation. This is based on documented combat encounters between Custodians and Space Marines, both loyalist and traitor. During the Webway War, there are accounts of individual Custodians holding tunnels against multiple squads of Chaos Space Marines, warriors who had been fighting for decades and were enhanced by warp blessings beyond what loyalist Astartes possessed. The Custodians didn't merely hold, they won. killing or routing their opponents and sustaining only minor injuries in return. The kill ratios provide hard numbers to support these claims. At the Battle of Gyros Thravian, as mentioned earlier, the Custodians achieved a kill ratio of approximately 33,000 to 1 against an Orc horde. Even accounting for the fact that Orcs are individually less capable than Space Marines, the sheer numerical disparity is telling. In the Webway War, where specific kill ratios are harder to establish due to the chaotic nature of the combat, the Custodians maintained defensive positions for years against enemies that included Chaos Space Marines, Greater Demons, and Corrupted Titans. The fact that they survived at all, let alone held their ground, speaks to combat effectiveness that outstrips Space Marines by orders of magnitude. Another way to examine the ratio is through mission equivalent comparisons. The Adeptus Custodes, throughout their history, have undertaken missions that Space Marine forces would require company strength or even chapter strength deployments to accomplish. A single shield squad of Custodians, numbering 3 to 5 warriors, can accomplish objectives that would require an entire Space Marine tactical squad or more. A shield host, which might number a few hundred Custodians at most, can impact a war zone in ways that would require multiple Space Marine companies working in coordination. This is not just about raw combat power. It is about the versatility and independence that Custodians bring to the battlefield. A Space Marine company must bring specialists, must coordinate different squad types to achieve objectives. Tactical squads for basic combat, assault squads for close quarters, devastators for heavy support, scouts for reconnaissance. The company requires all these elements working together to be maximally effective. A Custodian force requires none of this specialization because each warrior is already a specialist in everything. They are their own tactical support, assault element, reconnaissance force, and heavy weapons platform all at once. The strategic value calculation provides another angle on the ratio. The Emperor's statement about preferring to lose 1,000 Space Marines rather than one Custodian was not about individual combat power alone. It was about strategic worth. A Space Marine can be replaced. Given time, gene seed, and aspirants, a chapter can rebuild its losses. A Custodian cannot be easily replaced. Each one represents decades of irreplaceable work, genetic alchemy that cannot be rushed or mass-produced, training that cannot be abbreviated. The loss of a Space Marine is tactical setback. The loss of a Custodian is a strategic disaster. When the Emperor stated his preference, he was making a calculation about the long-term survival of the Imperium. The Custodians guard terror. They protect the Emperor himself. They are the last line of defense against threats that target the very heart of humanity. In that role, even a degraded Custodian force, depleted but still present, is worth more than 10 full Space Marine chapters, because those chapters might conquer a sector of the galaxy, but the Custodians defend the very source from which the Imperium's power flows. The ratio also holds up when you consider specific capabilities that cannot be easily quantified. A Custodian's ability to operate independently, without support or resupply, allows him to accomplish missions that would require extensive logistical support for a Space Marine force. A Custodian's mental capabilities allow him to process tactical situations and make decisions at a speed that would require a Space Marine to consult with his brothers or seek guidance from his captain. A Custodian's social training allows him to operate as a diplomat, investigator, or intelligence agent, in addition to his combat role, giving him mission versatility that Space Marines simply do not possess. Perhaps most tellingly, the Emperor himself, who understood warfare and military effectiveness better than any being in the galaxy, chose to create both forces despite the vast difference in capability. He created the Space Marines as his army, millions strong, capable of conquering the galaxy. He created the Custodes as his personal guard, 10,000 strong, capable of defending terror against any threat. These were deliberate choices. If the Emperor had believed he could defend terror with Space Marines, he would have done so. If he had believed he could conquer the galaxy with Custodes, he would have done so. The fact that he created both, each optimized for their specific role, tells you everything you need to know about the relative capabilities of each force. The 100-to-1 ratio is not propaganda, it is not exaggeration. It is a conservative estimate of the combat effectiveness gap between a custodian and a space marine, supported by historical battles, direct statements from the Emperor, and the basic mathematics of transhuman warfare. A single custodian can engage 100 space marines and have reasonable odds of victory. This seems impossible only if you think of the custodian as merely a better space marine. He is not. He is something categorically different, a weapon system of such sophistication that comparing him to an Astartes is like comparing a lasgun to a plasma weapon. Both can kill, but one operates on principles so far beyond the other that comparison becomes almost meaningless. When people question this ratio, when they suggest it cannot possibly be accurate, they are thinking in terms of conventional warfare where numbers matter most. But the custodians do not fight conventionally. They represent the absolute peak of what genetic engineering and military training can produce. Warriors so far beyond normal that they transcend the categories that apply to other forces. The ratio stands because it must stand, because anything less would not be sufficient to guard the Emperor, to defend Terra, to stand as the ultimate bulwark against a galaxy that wants humanity dead. One custodian equals 100 space marines, not because the space marines are weak, but because the custodes are just that far beyond human limitations, even transhuman ones. Primaris space marines, still not enough. In the wake of the great rifts tearing the galaxy in half, the Imperium found itself beset by threats on a scale not seen since the Horus heresy. In response, Robute Guilliman returned from 10,000 years of stasis and elevated to the position of Lord Commander of the Imperium, unveiled one of the most closely guarded secrets in recent Imperial history: the Primaris Space Marines. These were Astartes created using improved gene seed and additional organs, warriors who stood taller, fought longer, and survived more punishment than their traditional brothers. To many observers, they seemed to bridge the gap between the old Astartes and the Custodes. They were wrong. The Primaris Marines represent an impressive achievement in genetic engineering. They incorporate 3 additional organs beyond the standard 19 that traditional Space Marines receive. The sinew coils increase their strength. The Magnificat enhances their overall physical capabilities. The Belisarius furnace makes them more resilient to injury and enhances their regenerative abilities. Combined, these organs create a Space Marine who stands noticeably taller, approximately 9 feet in armor compared to the 8 feet of traditional Astartes. They are stronger, tougher, and in many ways superior to their older brothers. And yet they remain Space Marines, and the gulf between even enhanced Space Marines and the Custodes remains as vast as ever. To understand why the Primaris improvements, impressive as they are, fail to close the gap, you must understand the fundamental difference between incremental enhancement and complete genetic reconstruction. The Primaris Marines are still built on the same basic template as traditional Astartes. They receive gene seed derived from the Primarchs. They undergo organ implantation during adolescence, though the process has been refined and improved. They are trained using the same tactical doctrines, the same squad-based combat philosophy, the same strategic frameworks that have served the Adeptus Astartes for 10 millennia. The Primaris are better Space Marines, but they are still Space Marines, created through a process that is, at its core, the same mass production methodology that has always defined the Astartes. The additional organs do not change the fundamental nature of how a Space Marine is made. A Primaris still has his human genes augmented rather than completely rewritten. He still receives standardized implants rather than individualized genetic reconstruction. He still undergoes training measured in years rather than decades. He is still optimized for squad combat rather than individual supremacy. The Primaris process represents refinement of the Space Marine template, improvement within the existing framework, but it does not transcend that framework the way Custodian creation does. Consider the size comparison. A Primaris Marine stands 9 feet tall in armor, matching or exceeding the height of some Custodians. On the surface, this seems to eliminate one of the Custodian's advantages. But size is not what makes a Custodian superior. It is merely the most visible manifestation of deeper enhancements. A Custodian's size comes from genetic reconstruction at the cellular level, every fiber of his being rebuilt to embody perfection. A Primaris's size comes from enhanced growth during the implantation process, his human frame pushed to larger dimensions. The end result may look similar on casual observation, but the underlying reality is completely different. A Primaris Marine is stronger than a traditional Astartes, but he still falls short of Custodian strength. Tests comparing Primaris to Custodes have shown that while the Primaris can match or exceed traditional Space Marine strength benchmarks, they remain noticeably weaker than Custodians. A Primaris might exert 2.5 tons of force with his primary arm, compared to the 2 tons a traditional Marine might manage. But a Custodian can exert 3 tons or more, and more importantly, can sustain that level of force for far longer. The Primaris improvements close the gap, but do not eliminate it. Reaction speed shows a similar pattern. Primaris Marines react faster than traditional Astartes, their enhanced nervous systems providing marginal improvements in combat response time. But marginal improvements in milliseconds do not compare to the fundamental advantage Custodes possess in their almost precognitive awareness of threats. A Primaris Marine might shave a few milliseconds off his reaction time compared to his traditional brothers. A Custodian operates on a completely different timescale, reacting to threats before they fully materialize. The gap narrows but remains unbridgeable. The additional organs make Primaris Marines more resilient, but this resilience still pales compared to Custodian durability. A Primaris can survive wounds that would kill a traditional Marine, his enhanced healing factors and redundant systems keeping him in the fight longer. But Custodians routinely fight through injuries that would kill Primaris Marines as surely as they would kill traditional Astartes. The difference in durability is not about having more redundant organs or better healing factors. It is about having a body that operates on biological principles so advanced that injury itself becomes a relative concept rather than an absolute limitation. Perhaps most tellingly, the Primaris Marines still employ squad-based tactics identical to traditional Astartes. They form tactical squads, intercessor squads, aggressor squads, all organized around the same fundamental principle of combined arms warfare that has always defined Space Marine doctrine. They work together, support each other, coordinate their fire. They are still soldiers designed for army-scale operations. The Primaris process does nothing to bridge the philosophical gap between soldiers and champions, between warriors designed for mass deployment and warriors designed for individual supremacy. When Guilliman unveiled the Primaris Marines to the Adeptus Custodes, the reaction from the Golden Warriors was polite but unimpressed. Captain General Trajan Valoris acknowledged the improvements in the Astartes template, but made it clear that the Custodes still stood far above even these enhanced Space Marines. There was no rivalry in this assessment, no competition. It was a simple statement of fact. The Primaris Marines are better than traditional Astartes, which makes them better suited to the role for which Space Marines were designed. But they remain in a different category than the Custodes, occupying a space between standard Astartes and the Golden Warriors, but closer to the former than the latter. Combat trials, while not widely publicized, have apparently been conducted comparing Primaris Marines to Custodians. While specific results remain classified, the general conclusion is that Primaris Marines perform approximately 10 to 20% better than traditional Astartes against Custodian opponents. This might sound significant until you realize that the baseline comparison remains heavily in the Custodian's favor. If a traditional Space Marine needs 100 of his brothers to match a single Custodian, a Primaris Marine might need only 80 or 90. The improvement is real, but nowhere near sufficient to change the fundamental dynamic. The equipment gap remains similarly unbridged. Primaris Marines have access to new weapons and armor patterns, including the Mark X power armor, and weapons like the bolt rifle that fires longer range, more powerful shells than the traditional bolter. These are improvements over traditional Astartes equipment. But Primaris gear is still mass-produced ceramite armor and standardized weapons, manufactured by the Mechanicus according to established templates. It is not handcrafted auramite armor individually fitted to each warrior. It is not weapons forged using techniques that predate the Imperium itself. The strategic value calculation also remains unchanged. A Primaris Marine is still a Space Marine, replaceable through recruitment and gene seed cultivation. The loss of a Primaris company is a significant tactical setback, but not a strategic disaster. Chapters can replace their losses, can recruit new aspirants, and create new Primaris Marines using the enhanced gene seed. The time investment is measured in years, the resource cost is substantial but manageable, and the process can be scaled to meet demand. None of this applies to Custodians, whose creation remains as difficult and time-consuming as ever. There is also a subtle but important difference in how Primaris Marines and Custodians view their own roles. Primaris Marines, like their traditional brothers, see themselves as part of a chapter, as one warrior among many, as a piece of a larger military organization. Their identity is bound up in their chapter's history and traditions. They think in terms of squad, company, and chapter-level operations. Custodians see themselves as individual agents of the Emperor's will, complete warriors who require no one else to fulfill their duty. This psychological difference reinforces the tactical differences in how each force operates. Some have suggested that given enough time and refinement, the Primaris process could be further enhanced, perhaps eventually creating Space Marines who truly do approach Custodian capabilities. This misunderstands the fundamental limitation. The Space Marine creation process, even in its enhanced Primaris form, is designed to be replicable, scalable, and relatively quick. These requirements inherently limit how far the process can be improved. Every enhancement that makes the process more complex, more individualized, or more time-consuming moves it further from the mass production methodology that makes the Astartes viable as a galaxy-spanning military force. To create a Space Marine who genuinely matched a Custodian would require abandoning everything that makes the Space Marine concept work. You would need to start recruitment in infancy rather than adolescence. You would need to employ genetic reconstruction rather than organ implantation. You would need to dedicate decades to each warrior's creation rather than years. You would need to individualize every aspect of the process rather than following standardized protocols. At which point, you would not have created a better Space Marine. You would have created a Custodian by another name, and you would have lost the ability to produce them in numbers sufficient to fight across the galaxy. The Primaris Marines represent the practical limit of how far the Space Marine concept can be pushed while remaining true to its original purpose. They are better soldiers for a mass-produced army, but the Custodes were never meant to be part of an army. They serve a different role, fulfill a different purpose, and their capabilities reflect that fundamental difference. No amount of incremental enhancement to the Space Marine template will bridge that gap, because the gap exists by design, not by accident. When Rabut Guilliman looks upon the Custodes, even with his Primaris Marine standing beside him, he sees warriors who exceed even his greatest creations. The Primarch who wrote the Codex Astartes, who understood Space Marine warfare better than perhaps any being alive, save the Emperor himself, acknowledges the supremacy of the Custodes. His Primaris Marines are an impressive achievement, a meaningful improvement to the Astartes template, but they do not diminish the Custodes. If anything, by demonstrating the practical limits of Space Marine enhancement, they highlight just how far beyond those limits the Custodes actually exist. The Primaris Marines are better Space Marines, and that is precisely what they were designed to be. Better at squad tactics, better at army-scale operations, better suited to fight the Imperium's endless wars across millions of worlds. But they remain Space Marines, bound by the same fundamental limitations that have always defined the Astartes. They are soldiers, albeit exceptional ones. The Custodes are something else entirely, and no enhancement to the soldier's template will transform him into a champion. The gap remains, will always remain, because it was built into the very foundation of how each force was conceived and created. The price of perfection, why they can't replace Marines. Given the vast superiority of the Custodes over even Primaris Space Marines, a logical question emerges. Why does the Imperium maintain millions of Astartes when a much smaller force of Custodes could theoretically be more effective? If one Custodian equals 100 Space Marines, why not simply create more Custodes and phase out the Space Marines entirely? The answer reveals as much about the nature of the Imperium as it does about the limitations of the Custodian Guard themselves. The most fundamental limitation is time. Creating a Custodian requires decades of continuous bioalchemical treatment, starting from infancy and continuing through the candidate's physical maturation. Even with perfect candidates and the full resources of Terra at their disposal, the gene wrights who oversee Custodian creation can only produce a handful of new warriors per year. The math is brutally simple. It took the Emperor 2 centuries to create the original 10,000 Custodians, working with resources and knowledge that may not be fully replicated in the modern Imperium. In the 9,000 years since his interment on the Golden Throne, Terra has created approximately 9,000 more, maintaining the Custodes at roughly their original strength, but unable to expand their numbers meaningfully. Compare this to Space Marine creation. A chapter can recruit and train new battle brothers continuously, producing dozens or even hundreds of new warriors per decade if gene seed supplies are adequate. The entire process from recruitment to full battle brother status takes years rather than decades. Even accounting for losses in combat, which are substantial, chapters can maintain their strength and even expand when circumstances allow. The Imperium fields approximately 1 million Space Marines at any given time, organized into roughly 1,000 chapters. Replacing the entire Astartes force with Custodes would require creating 1 million Custodians, a task that would take millennia, even if the resources and knowledge existed. But time is only part of the constraint. The resource investment required to create a single Custodian is astronomical. Each warrior receives personalized genetic modification, bespoke equipment crafted from materials that are literally irreplaceable, decades of training from the finest instructors in the Imperium. The Auramite alone required to equip a single Custodian is worth a planet's ransom. The genetic expertise needed to perform the bioalchemy is possessed by only a handful of gene wrights on Terra, knowledge that cannot be easily transmitted or expanded. Creating 10 million Custodians would require resources that the Imperium simply does not possess, even if all other obstacles could be overcome. The strategic role differential is equally important. Space Marines were designed to be an army of conquest, to spread across the galaxy and bring worlds into the Imperium's fold. Their entire tactical doctrine, their organizational structure, their equipment and training all optimize for this role. They can garrison worlds, can conduct extended campaigns, can coordinate with Imperial Guard forces and planetary defense militias. They think in terms of company-level operations and chapter-wide strategies. They are designed to project power across interstellar distances and maintain that projection over extended periods. Custodians, by contrast, are designed for a much more focused role, defending Terra and the Emperor. Everything about their training and mindset optimizes for this specific mission. They think in terms of defensive positioning, threat assessment, protection of critical assets. While they are certainly capable of offensive operations, their psychological conditioning and tactical doctrine lean toward protection rather than conquest. Asking custodians to garrison conquered worlds or conduct extended campaigns away from Terra would be using them in a role they were not optimized for, wasting their capabilities on tasks that Space Marines handle more naturally. There is also a psychological component. Space Marines, despite their transhuman enhancements, maintain a connection to the broader human experience. They remember being mortal, even if those memories are distant and altered by hypno-indoctrination. They understand human concerns, can relate to the populations they protect and conquer, can serve as inspiring figures that baseline humans can look up to and seek to emulate. This makes them effective not just as warriors, but as symbols of the Imperium's power, as heroes whose legends inspire entire worlds to greater acts of loyalty and sacrifice. Custodians are so far removed from baseline humanity that they struggle to maintain that connection. Their perfection creates distance. When common citizens see a Space Marine, they see a mighty warrior, inhuman but still recognizably derived from human stock. When they see a Custodian, they see something that transcends humanity entirely, something closer to the Emperor himself than to any mortal. This distance is useful when guarding the Emperor, when representing his absolute authority, but it is a liability when trying to inspire loyalty among populations who need to feel that their protectors understand their concerns. The scarcity of the Custodes is itself a strategic resource. Because there are so few, each deployment of Custodian forces carries immense symbolic weight. When a shield host deploys to a war zone, every faction in that region understands that the situation is critical, that the Emperor himself has taken an interest. This gravitas would be diluted if Custodians were common, if every battlefield saw golden warriors fighting. Their rarity is part of their power, making each appearance an event of strategic significance rather than a routine deployment. The command structure issues would also be substantial. The Custodes answer only to the Emperor, and in his absence, to the Captain General and the other High Lords of Terra. They do not integrate into the Imperium's military command structure. They do not take orders from War Masters or Lord Commanders, except by choice. This independence is essential for their role as the Emperor's personal guard, ensuring that no political faction can suborn them or turn them to purposes other than their primary mission. But it makes them poorly suited for army-scale operations, where coordination with other Imperial forces is essential. Space Marines, despite their own independence and pride, understand their place in the broader military structure. They coordinate with the Imperial Guard, with the Navy, with the Adeptus Mechanicus. They accept missions from Imperial Command, serve as part of larger strategic deployments, work within the system even while maintaining their chapter autonomy. A galaxy defended primarily by Custodians would lack this integration, would struggle with coordination issues that the current mixed force structure handles more gracefully. There is also the question of genetic diversity. The Space Marines derive from 19 Primarchs, though only 9 loyal Primarchs gene seed is commonly used in the 41st Millennium. This genetic diversity provides robustness against threats that might target specific gene lines. If a plague or warp corruption affects one Primarch's descendants, the others remain unaffected. If a genetic flaw becomes problematic in one gene line, the others can compensate. The Custodes all derive from essentially the same genetic template, the Emperor's own genetic material. This uniformity is a source of their perfection, but also a potential vulnerability. A threat that could affect one Custodian might threaten all of them. The practical realities of galactic warfare also favor maintaining the Space Marines. The Imperium faces threats across 1 million worlds simultaneously. Orc hordes erupt on one sector's edge. Tyrannid hive fleets descend on another. Chaos cults rise in a third. Necron tomb worlds awaken in a fourth. No force, no matter how individually capable, can be in all places at once. The Space Marines' numbers allow them to respond to multiple threats simultaneously. to garrison critical worlds, to serve as rapid response forces across the entire Imperium. Even if the Custodians could theoretically handle each threat more effectively, they cannot be everywhere at once, and warfare on a galactic scale requires presence across that entire galaxy. The relationship between the two forces is symbiotic rather than competitive. The Custodians defend the heart of the Imperium, ensuring that Terra and the Emperor remain secure. This frees the Space Marines to project power outward, to fight on distant worlds, without worrying that the capital itself is vulnerable. The Space Marines, in turn, keep threats away from Terra, ensuring that the battles the Custodians must fight are limited to those rare occasions when enemies actually reach the throne world itself. Each force enables the other to focus on what it does best. This is not to say that the Custodians could not, in theory, serve in the Space Marines' role if circumstances forced them to do so. Shield hosts have deployed to war zones across the Imperium, particularly since Guilliman's return, and they have proven devastatingly effective in whatever roles they undertake. But effectiveness is not the same as optimization. A master craftsman can certainly use his skills to mass-produce items if necessary, but it is a waste of his unique capabilities, using a scalpel where a hammer would suffice. The Emperor, in his wisdom, created both forces because both are necessary. He did not make the Custodians numerous because they serve a role that requires quality over quantity, individual supremacy over mass deployment. He did not make the Space Marines as capable as Custodians because they serve a role that requires them to be produced in numbers that perfect warriors cannot achieve. The Imperium needs its elite guard of 10,000 perfect warriors. It also needs its million-strong army of exceptional warriors. Neither force can replace the other because they were never designed to be interchangeable. The price of perfection is not just the resources required to create perfect warriors. It is also the limitations that perfection imposes. The Custodians are perfect for their role, but that role is narrow by design. The Space Marines are less perfect, but far more versatile, capable of adapting to the infinitely varied demands of galactic warfare. In the eternal war that consumes the Imperium, there is need for both the perfect guardian and the adaptable soldier. The mathematics may favor the Custodians in direct combat, but the logistics favor the Space Marines for everything else. And in a war that spans a galaxy and 10,000 years, logistics matter as much as combat prowess. Beyond Terra's walls, the modern era. For 10,000 years following the Emperor's interment upon the Golden Throne, the Adeptus Custodians remained on Terra, guarding the Imperial Palace with the same absolute dedication they had always shown. They did not leave the throne world. They did not march to war alongside the Space Marines. They stood their vigil in silence. The greatest warriors humanity had ever created relegated to ceremonial guard duty while the Imperium burned around them. This was not cowardice or abandonment of duty. It was the ultimate expression of their purpose. The Emperor lived, and while he lived, they would guard him. Nothing else mattered. But with the opening of the Great Rift and the return of Reboot Guilliman, that ancient calculus changed. The galaxy was literally torn in half, chaos pouring through reality's wounds on a scale not seen since the Horus Heresy. Terra itself came under direct assault during the Battle of Lionsgate, cornate demons breaching the walls of the Imperial Palace for the first time in 10 millennia. The Custodians threw back the attack, but the message was clear. The defensive strategy that had guided them for 10,000 years was no longer sufficient. If they remained purely reactive, waiting for threats to reach Terra before engaging, those threats would eventually overwhelm even the palace's formidable defenses. Guilliman, with the authority granted by his position as Lord Commander and Imperial Regent, issued new orders to the Adeptus Custodians. For the first time since the heresy, significant forces of Custodians would deploy beyond Terra, would take a proactive role in defending the Imperium rather than simply guarding its heart. This represented a fundamental shift in Custodian doctrine. a recognition that the best defense of terror might sometimes require taking the fight to the enemy before they could threaten the throne world. The Custodians of the 41st Millennium have adapted to this new role while maintaining their core identity. Shield hosts now accompany the Indomitus Crusade, Guilliman's galaxy-spanning effort to push back the forces of chaos and stabilize the Imperium. These deployments are not like Space Marine campaigns. A shield host does not conquer worlds or garrison systems. Instead, they serve as the tip of the spear for the most critical operations, deploy for specific high-value targets, perform missions where failure is not an option. When Guilliman's forces encounter a chaos stronghold that has resisted conventional assault, when a demon incursion threatens a strategic world, when a target must be eliminated regardless of the defenses arrayed around it, the Custodians deploy. They strike with overwhelming force, accomplish their objective, and withdraw, leaving the follow-up operations to the Space Marines and Imperial Guard. This hit-and-run style of warfare maximizes their effectiveness while conserving their limited numbers, using them as a scalpel rather than a hammer. The psychological impact of Custodian deployments cannot be overstated. Entire sectors that had begun to doubt the Imperium's strength, that had started to whisper of independence or had fallen prey to chaos cult infiltration, see golden warriors fighting in the Emperor's name and remember their loyalty. Traitor forces that had grown confident in their power encounter Custodians and realize they face opponents against whom their warp-granted blessings mean nothing. The symbolic value of the Custodians fighting beyond terror reinforces Imperial authority in ways that pure military victory cannot match. Specific operations demonstrate the effectiveness of this new doctrine. During the Terran Crusade that preceded the Indomitus Crusade's launch, Custodians deployed to Luna alongside the reborn Guilliman, fighting Thousand Sons traitor Marines who had infiltrated humanity's ancient moon. The Custodians cut through Magnus's forces like wheat, their anti-psyker training and absolute mental discipline rendering the sorcerer's powers ineffective. What could have been a prolonged siege lasting months was resolved in days by the presence of the Golden Warriors. In another operation, a shield host deployed to cleanse a corrupted Mechanicus Forge world, where the tech priests had fallen to the worship of dark gods and were producing demon engines for the enemy. The Custodians struck at the heart of the corruption, killing the fallen Fabricator General and his inner circle in a single lightning assault. The leaderless traitor forces collapsed without the coordinating intelligence that had directed their efforts, and the world was reclaimed with minimal further casualties. A Space Marine chapter might have accomplished the same objective eventually, but it would have required sustained campaigning, significant casualties, and probable destruction of much of the Forge world's infrastructure. The Custodians' precision strike preserved the world while eliminating the threat. The Custodians' role as heralds for Primaris Space Marine reinforcements has proven equally important. When shield hosts arrive at Space Marine chapter homeworlds bearing the Primaris gene seed and technology, their presence serves to legitimize these controversial new warriors. Chapters that might have resisted accepting Primaris reinforcements, that might have seen them as replacements or insults to their traditions, cannot refuse when the Emperor's own guard delivers them with his blessing. The Custodians' reputation and authority overcome suspicion and pride, smoothing the integration of Primaris Marines into chapters across the Imperium. But even as they take a more active role in the Imperium's defense, the Custodians remain fundamentally different from any other Imperial force. They deploy at their own discretion, accepting requests for assistance, but not taking orders from anyone save the Captain General. They do not coordinate their operations with broader Imperial strategy, except when they choose to do so. They remain the Emperor's personal force, operating according to their own assessment of where they can best serve his will, rather than following the dictates of any military command structure. This independence creates occasional friction with Imperial authorities, who would prefer to direct Custodian forces to critical war zones. Requests for Custodian assistance often go unanswered, not because the Custodians ignore legitimate threats, but because their priorities differ from conventional military thinking. They might refuse to reinforce a strategic sector if they judge that the risk of deploying away from terror outweighs the potential benefit. They might intervene in situations that seem minor by military standards, but represent threats to imperial stability or security that conventional forces cannot address. The creation of specialist formations within the Custodies reflects their adaptation to this more active role. The Shadow Keepers, who guard the dark cells beneath the palace where the Imperium's most dangerous prisoners are held, now venture forth to hunt escaped prisoners or prevent artifacts of power from falling into enemy hands. The Dread Host, traditionally the most conservative shield host, has begun accepting missions that take them to the edges of the Imperium when threats emerge that only Custodians can handle. The Solar Watch has taken on the role of coordinating Custodian operations beyond Terra, serving as the intelligence arm that identifies targets requiring their attention. The relationship between the modern Custodes and the Space Marines has evolved as well. Where once the two forces rarely interacted, now they fight alongside each other with increasing frequency. This cooperation has not diminished the clear superiority of the Custodes in any way. If anything, fighting beside Golden Warriors reminds Space Marines of the gulf that separates them, seeing first-hand capabilities that exceed their own by orders of magnitude. But it has also bred respect, an acknowledgement from both sides that each serves the Emperor in their own way, that the Imperium needs both the Guardian and the soldier. There are accounts from the Indomitus Crusade of Space Marines watching Custodians in combat for the first time, seeing with their own eyes what had previously been merely legend. The reactions are uniformly similar: awe, followed by humility, followed by renewed determination to live up to their own calling even if they can never match the Golden Warriors. One Blood Angel's captain was recorded as saying that watching a shield squad of Custodians clear an enemy stronghold was like watching the Emperor himself fight, that he finally understood what humanity was capable of becoming if perfection could be achieved. The deployment of Custodes beyond Terra has not weakened the defense of the throne world itself. The vast majority of the 10,000 remain on Terra, guarding the palace, standing vigil over the Golden Throne, maintaining the absolute security that has protected the Emperor for 10 millennia. The shield hosts that deploy beyond Terra's walls represent a small fraction of the total Custodian force, carefully calculated to ensure that Terra never lacks adequate protection. The mathematics are precise. Enough force projection to influence critical situations across the Imperium, but never so much that Terra's own defenses become vulnerable. This new era of Custodian warfare is still being written. With each deployment, with each victory, the Custodes demonstrate that their reputation is not mere legend, but earned through capabilities that remain unmatched by any other force in the Imperium. They show that 10,000 years of standing guard have not dulled their skills, have not diminished their effectiveness. If anything, the Custodes of the 41st millennium are as deadly as their forebears who fought in the Webway War. Their training and equipment refined over millennia to levels of perfection that would have impressed even Constantine Valdor. The question of whether this more active role will continue depends largely on how the greater strategic situation evolves. Guilliman has made clear that he values Custodian participation in the Indomitus Crusade, but the decision to deploy remains with the Custodes themselves. Should the threats to Terra increase, should the situation deteriorate to the point where the throne world's security is at risk, the Custodes would withdraw without hesitation, abandoning external operations to return to their primary duty. Nothing matters more than the Emperor's safety. Nothing ever will. For now, the Imperium benefits from the presence of the Custodes beyond Terra's walls. Their interventions in critical situations tipping the balance in battles that might otherwise have been lost. But make no mistake, these are not permanent deployments. These are not commitments that would prevent immediate withdrawal if Terra calls. The Custodes remain what they have always been, the Emperor's personal guard, temporarily lending their strength to the broader Imperium, but always ready to return to their true purpose. They are beyond Terra's walls, but Terra remains their home, their duty, their reason for existence. This modern era has demonstrated what many suspected but few had seen proven, that the Custodians are not merely ceremonial guards, not warriors whose skills have atrophied through millennia of inaction. They are the deadliest fighting force humanity has ever created, and when they choose to take the field, the enemies of the Imperium learn fear of a kind that even Space Marines cannot inspire. The Golden Giants have left their vigil, if only briefly, and the galaxy trembles. Conclusion: worth 100, worth a world. We have journeyed through the history and capabilities of the Adeptus Custodes, examining from every angle the question of why one of these golden warriors equals 100 Space Marines. We have seen their creation process, so fundamentally different from the mass-produced Astartes that comparison becomes almost meaningless. We have analyzed their physical and mental superiority, capabilities that transcend enhancement and approach perfection. We have studied their equipment, each piece a masterwork that represents the pinnacle of the Imperium's technological heritage. We have examined their combat philosophy. Champions who need no support, no coordination, no weaknesses that enemies can exploit. We have walked the blood-soaked halls of the Webway, where they held impossible ground for impossible years. We have heard the stories of Constantin Valdor and the other legendary Custodians, whose deeds define what transhuman warriors can achieve when perfection is the standard. We have done the mathematics, examined the kill ratios, reviewed the Emperor's own assessment of their worth. We have seen why even Primaris Marines, improved as they are, fail to bridge the gap. And we have understood why, despite their vast superiority, the Custodes cannot simply replace the Space Marines, why both forces are necessary for the Imperium's survival. The ratio of 100 to 1 is not propaganda, it is not exaggeration. It is, if anything, a conservative estimate of the gulf that separates a Custodian from even the mighty Adeptus Astartes. The Emperor's own assessment suggested a ratio of 1,000 to 1. The Battle of Gyros Thravian suggested kill ratios that make even that number seem modest. The war within the Webway demonstrated that Custodians can survive and fight effectively in conditions that would annihilate any other force. The historical record is clear. These are warriors whose capability exceeds Space Marines by orders of magnitude, and that magnitude is supported by every metric we can measure. But the true worth of a Custodian cannot be captured in ratios alone. Yes, one Custodian might equal 100 Space Marines in direct combat, but his worth is measured in other ways as well. He is irreplaceable in a way that Space Marines are not, representing decades of work and resources that cannot be easily duplicated. He is symbolic, embodying the Emperor's power in a way that inspires awe even in other transhuman warriors. He is strategic, his presence shifting the calculus of entire campaigns, his mere deployment signaling that the situation is of critical importance. When the Emperor said he would rather watch 1,000 Space Marines die than lose a single Custodian, he was not making a statement about combat effectiveness alone. He was speaking to the question of what can and cannot be replaced, what is merely valuable versus what is invaluable. Space Marines can be created again. They can be recruited, trained, equipped, and deployed across the galaxy in numbers sufficient to fight its endless wars. Custodians cannot be mass-produced. Each one is unique. A work of genetic art that exists nowhere else in the galaxy, a warrior whose capabilities approach the theoretical maximum of what biology and training can achieve. Their worth is also measured in what they protect. The Custodes guard the Emperor, the being upon whom the Imperium's entire existence depends. The Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that allows warp travel, is powered by the Emperor's will. The golden throne that keeps the Webway portal beneath the palace sealed, preventing Terra from being drowned in demons, is maintained by the Emperor's constant attention. If the Emperor dies, the Astronomicon goes dark, warp travel becomes impossible, and the Imperium fragments into isolated systems that will be conquered piecemeal by its enemies. The stakes of the Custodes' duty are literally the survival of all humanity. In that context, what is the worth of one Custodian? How many Space Marines is it acceptable to sacrifice to ensure that the Emperor's guards remain strong enough to fulfill their duty? The Emperor's answer was 1,000. Not because he valued Space Marines lightly, but because he understood that no matter how many Astartes die, they can be replaced. But if the Custodes fail, if the Emperor falls because his guard was depleted beyond their ability to protect him, then every sacrifice of Space Marine or Guardsman or civilian becomes meaningless because the Imperium itself falls. This is the calculation that has guided the Custodes for 10,000 years. Every decision they make, every deployment they undertake or refuse, every choice about how to employ their limited numbers, all of it comes back to that core mission. Protect the Emperor, maintain the security of Terra, ensure that the heart of the Imperium never stops beating. Everything else, no matter how important it might seem, is secondary to this absolute priority. For 10,000 years, they have succeeded. The Emperor lives, even if only as a barely living corpse, sustained by the Golden Throne. Terra remains secure, even when Chaos warbands breach the outer system, even when demons assault the walls of the palace itself. The Imperium endures, fractured and bleeding but alive, because its heart continues to beat. This is the legacy of the Adeptus Custodes, the proof of their worth written not in the bodies of slain enemies, though those number beyond counting, but in the simple fact that after 10,000 years of unimaginable threats, the Emperor still lives. We began this journey by asking whether one Custodian is really worth 100 Space Marines. We end it understanding that the question undersells the reality. A Custodian is worth 100 Space Marines in direct combat. He is worth 1,000 Space Marines in strategic value. He is worth a world in terms of the resources required to create him, and he is worth the Imperium itself in terms of the duty he fulfills. The Space Marines are the Imperium's sword, striking out into the galaxy to conquer and defend. They are mighty, impressive, the terror of the Emperor's enemies. But swords can be reforged when they break. The Custodes are the Imperium's shield, standing unmovable between the Emperor and everything that would destroy him. And if that shield ever fails, no sword will save what is lost. If you've made it this far, if you've journeyed with me through the golden halls of the Imperial Palace and the blood-soaked tunnels of the Webway, through battles legendary and wars forgotten, through the mathematics of transhuman warfare and the philosophy that guides the Emperor's finest, then you understand. One Custodian, 100 Space Marines. The ratio stands not because Space Marines are weak, but because Custodes are exactly what humanity becomes when perfection is achieved, when every resource is bent toward creating the ultimate warrior, when 10,000 years of vigilance proves that some things truly are worth protecting at any cost. If you enjoyed this deep dive into why the Adeptus Custodes stands so far above even the mighty Space Marines, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share it with others who love the lore of Warhammer 40,000, who wonder about the capabilities of the Imperium's finest warriors, who want to understand the mathematics and history behind one of the most elite fighting forces in all of science fiction. The galaxy is vast, the lore is deep, and there are always more stories to tell, more warriors to examine, more mysteries to uncover in the grim darkness of the far future. Until next time, remember, in an Imperium of 1,000,000 worlds and 1,000,000,000,000 souls, there exist 10,000 warriors who guard its beating heart. They stand in golden armor, wield spears that crackle with deadly energy, and embody perfection in every way that matters. They are the Adeptus Custodes. They are the Emperor's finest. They are worth more than mere numbers can express. And as long as they stand vigil, the Imperium endures.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.